Martin Buber. Tales of the Hasidim. Book 1. The Early Masters. Shmelki of Nikolsburg. David's harp. When Rabbi Shmelka and his brother Rabbi Pinchas, later the Rabbi of Frankfurt, were in Mezritch, they rented an attic room so that they might be undisturbed in their studies. Once, after the conclusion of the Sabbath, they were sitting and studying late at night when they heard a strange weeping in which they could clearly detect the voices of both a man and a woman. They looked out of the window, and there, on a bench, in the alley, they saw the servant and the maid of the house, both in tears. When they asked them the reason, they said that they had been employed there for a long time and had been waiting to get married for years, but the master of the house was against it and had managed to prevent it again and again. At that, the brothers declared that all that was necessary was to set up the marriage canopy. Everything else, including the consent of the master of the house, would then come of itself. They left at once to wake the cantor, who immediately fetched 10 men, opened the house of prayer, and set up the canopy. The wedding was duly celebrated. Rabbi Shmelki beat time with a piece of branch, and Rabbi Pinchas clinked 2 candelabras so that they gave forth a beautiful sound. Then the Maggid came in. At the feast of King David, he had sat there with that remoteness of the soul which sometimes overtook him. Suddenly he jumped up and ran to the house of prayer. "Don't you hear David's harp?" he cried. New Melodies. Rabbi Moshe Teitelbaum, the disciple of the seer of Lublin, said, "When Rabbi Shmelka prayed on a Sabbath and on feast days, but especially on the Day of Atonement, when he performed the service of the high priest, the mystery became manifest in the sound of music, carrying from word to word, and he sang new melodies, miracle of miracles, which he had never heard, and which no human ear had ever heard. And he did not even know what he was singing and what melody he was singing, for he clung to the upper world." End quote. A very old man who had sung in Rabbi Shmelka's choir when he was a boy used to tell this. It was the custom to lay out the notes for each text so that it would not be necessary to fetch them when the praying before the pulpit began. But the rabbi paid no attention to the notes and sang utterly new melodies which no one had ever heard. We singers all fell silent and listened to him. We could not understand from where those melodies came to him. In Nikolsburg, when Rabbi Shmelki was called to be the Rav of Nikolsburg, he prepared an impressive sermon which he intended to preach to the Talmud scholars of Moravia. On the way, he stopped over in the city of Krakow, and when the people there begged him to preach to them, he asked his disciple, Moshe Leib, later the Rabbi of Sasov, who had accompanied him, "Well, Moshe Leib, what shall I preach? The rabbi has prepared a splendid sermon for Nikolsburg. Why should he not preach that here as well?" answered Moshe Leib. Rabbi Shmelka took his advice. Now a number of men had come from Nikolsburg to Krakow in order to welcome him, and these heard the sermon. So when the Tzadik arrived in Nikolsburg, he asked his disciple, "Well, Moshe Leib, now what shall I preach on the Sabbath? I cannot dish up the same sermon over again to the men who heard me speak in Krakow. We must take some time," said Moshe Leib, "and discuss a problem of the law in preparation for a sermon." But up to Friday they did not have a moment's time to open a book. Finally, Rabbi Shmelka asked, "Well, Moshe, what shall we preach? On Friday evening they must surely give us a little free time," said Moshe Leib. They held in readiness a very large candle, which was to burn right through the night, and, when the crowd had gone home, they sat down before the book. Then a hen flew in at the window, and the whir of her wings put out the light. Said Rabbi Shmelki, "Well, Moshe Leib, now what are we to preach?" "Surely," Moshe Leib replied, "there will be no preaching until the afternoon, and so in the morning, after prayer, let us go into our room, lock the door, let no one in, and talk over a subject." In the morning, they went to prayer. Before the chapter for the week was read, the desk was moved in front of the ark, and the head of the congregation came and asked Rabbi Shmelka to give his sermon. The house of prayer was filled with the Talmud scholars of Moravia. Rabbi Shmelka had them bring him a volume of the Gemara, opened it at random, posed a problem from the page before him, and asked the scholars to discuss it. Then he too, so he said, would say his say. When they had all spoken, he put the prayer shawl over his head and remained like this for about a quarter of an hour. Then he organized the questions they had raised, 130 in number, and gave the replies, 72 in number, and there was nothing that was not answered, and solved, and quelled. Noting down. When Rabbi Shmelka was called to Nikolsburg in Moravia, a certain custom prevailed in that congregation. Every new Rav was asked to note down in the chronicle some new regulation which was to be followed from that time on. He too was asked to do this, but put it off from day to day. He looked at each and every one, and postponed noting anything in the book. He looked at them more and more closely, and over, and put off writing until they gave him to understand that the delay was becoming unduly long. Then he went to where the chronicle lay, and wrote down the 10 Commandments. The 7 Worldly Wisdoms. When Rabbi Shmelka assumed office in Nikolsburg, he preached on the 7 worldly wisdoms on the first 7 Sabbath days, 1 wisdom on each Sabbath. From week to week, the congregation grew more surprised at this peculiar choice of subject for a sermon, but no one ventured to question the Tzadik about it. On the 8th Sabbath he began by saying, "For a long time I did not understand the words of Solomon, the preacher. It is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. Why is it not written, than the song of fools?" This is the meaning. It is good to hear the rebuke of a wise man who has heard and understood the song of fools, that is, the 7 worldly wisdoms, which compared to the teachings of God are a song of fools. To another man, the foolish worldly sages could say, "It is easy for you to scorn our wisdoms, for you have not tasted of their sweetness. If you knew it, you would not want to know anything else." But he who has studied the 7 wisdoms and passed through their inmost core, only to choose the wisdom of the Torah, if such a man cries out, "Vanity of vanities," no one can gainsay him. The Messiah and those who pray. On the first day of the New Year festival, Rabbi Shmelka entered the house of prayer before the ram's horn was sounded, and prayed with tears in his eyes, "Alas, Lord of the world, all the people are crying to you, but what of all their clamor? They are thinking of nothing but their own needs, and not of the exile of your glory." On the second day, he again came before the blowing of the ram's horn, and wept and said, "It is written in the first book of Samuel, Wherefore cometh not the son of Jesse to eat bread, neither yesterday nor today?" Why did the King Messiah not come? Not yesterday on the first day of the New Year, and not today on the second. It is because today, just as yesterday, all their prayers are for nothing but bread, for nothing but the satisfaction of bodily needs. The tears of Esau. Another time he said, "In the Midrash it is written, Messiah, son of David, will not come before the tears of Esau have ceased to flow." The children of Israel, who are God's children, pray for mercy day and night, and shall they weep in vain, as long as the children of Esau shed tears? But the tears of Esau, that does not mean the tears which the peoples weep, and you do not weep. They are the tears which all human beings weep when they ask something for themselves and pray for it. And truly, Messiah, son of David, will not come until such tears have ceased to flow, until you weep because the divine presence is exiled, and because you yearn for its return. A Sermon for Atonement. On the eve of the Day of Atonement, Rabbi Shmelka of Nikolsburg put on his prayer shawl and went to the house of prayer. On his way from the entrance to the ark, he called aloud the words of the Scriptures, "For on this day shall atonement be made for you, to cleanse you." And after that he quoted Rabbi Akiba's words from the Mishnah, "Before whom do you atone, and who cleanses you? Your Father in heaven." All the people burst into tears. When he stood in front of the ark, he said, Brothers of my heart, you must know that the core of turning is the offering up of life itself. For we are of the seed of Abraham, who offered his life for the sanctification of the blessed name, and let them cast him into a lime kiln. We are of the seed of Isaac, who offered his life and laid his neck on the stone of the altar. They are surely pleading to our Father in heaven in our behalf on this holy and awful day of judgment. But let us too walk in their tracks and imitate their works. Let us offer up our own lives for the sanctification of the name of him who is blessed. Let us unite and sanctify his mighty name with fervent love, and with this as our purpose, let us say together, Hear, O Israel. And weeping, all the people said, Hear, O Israel. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. Then he went on to say, Dear brothers, now that it was vouchsafed us to unite and sanctify his name in great love, now that we have offered our lives, and our hearts have become cleansed for the service and fear of the Lord, we must also unite our souls. All souls come from one root. All are carved from the throne of his splendor, and so they are a part of God in heaven. Let us be united on earth too, so that the branches again may be as the root. Here we stand, cleansed and pure, to unite our souls, and we take upon us the commandment, Love thy neighbor as thyself. And all the people repeated aloud, Love thy neighbor as thyself. And he continued, Now that it has been vouchsafed us to unite his great name, and to unite our souls, which are a part of God in heaven, let the Holy Torah plead in our behalf before our Father in heaven. Once God offered it to all peoples and to all languages, but we alone accepted it and cried, All that the Lord hath spoken will we do. And only then did we say, We hear. And so it is fitting that the Torah ask our Father in heaven for mercy and grace for us on this holy and awful day of judgment. And he opened the doors of the ark. Then, in front of the open ark, he recited the confession of sins, and all the people repeated it after him word for word, and as they did so, they wept. He took out the scroll and, holding it high in his hands, spoke to his congregation about the sins of man. But in the end he said, You must know that the weeping we do on this day is unblessed if it is filled with gloom. For the divine presence does not dwell in heaviness of heart, but only in rejoicing in the commandments. And, see, no joy is greater than the joy on this day, when it is granted to us to drive all evil impulses from our hearts, through the power of turning, to come close to our Father in heaven, whose hand is outstretched to receive those who turn to him. And so, all the tears we shed on this day should be tears of joy, as it is written, Serve the Lord with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Sleep. Rabbi Shmelki did not want to interrupt his studies for too long a time, and so he always slept sitting up, his head resting on his arm. In his fingers he held a lit candle, which roused him when it guttered, and the flame touched his hand. When Rabbi Elimelech visited him and recognized the power of the holiness which was still locked within him, he prepared a couch for him, and with great difficulty persuaded him to lie down for a little while. Then he closed and shuttered the windows. Rabbi Shmelki slept until broad daylight. It did not take him long to notice this, but he was not sorry he had slept, for he was filled with a hitherto unknown sunny clearness. He went to the house of prayer and prayed before the congregation as usual. But to the congregation it seemed that they had never heard him before. They were entranced and uplifted by the manifest power of his holiness. When he recited the verses about the Red Sea, they gathered up the hems of their caftans, for fear the waves towering to the left and right might wet them with salty foam. Later Shmelki said to Elimelech, Not until this day did I know that one can also serve God with sleep. The rap. In Apt there was a servant of the house of prayer, whose duty it was to go through the town and, with his hammer, rap at the door of every Jewish house, for the men to come and pray, or learn, or recite psalms. He had only to rap ever so lightly, and instantly the sleepers started up, even if it was midnight, and dressed quickly, and hurried to the house of prayer, and long after he had rapped, the rap of their eager hearts echoed the rap of the hammer. The man had been granted this gift as a boy, when he had served Rabbi Shmelka of Nikolsburg with a heart that was awake and full of devotion. The clean freethinkers. A number of freethinkers in Nikolsburg were carrying on an argument with Rabbi Shmelka. But you will have to admit, they said in conclusion, that we, on our part, have virtues which the Poles lack. Our clothing, for instance, is spotlessly clean, and that is more than you can say for that of the Poles, who ignore the bidding of the sages. The wise man shall not wear a spotted robe. The rabbi laughed and replied, "You are right. Your clothes are clean and those of the Poles are not. That is because, according to what the Talmud says of the gradation of virtues, cleanliness leads to purity, purity to aloofness, and so on higher and higher to the rung of the Holy Spirit. Now, when the Poles set about beginning with cleanliness, the evil urge does all he possibly can to dissuade them from it, for he fears they will rise from rung to rung and attain to the Holy Spirit. And even when they try to fend off the evil urge and assure him that they do not intend to do any such thing, he does not believe them and will not stop until he has talked them out of cleanliness. But when the evil urge takes exception to your cleanliness, you need only assure him that you do not intend to rise, and he instantly takes you at your word and lets you be just as clean as you like. The enemy. A rich and distinguished man in Nikolsburg was hostile to Rabbi Shmelka and tried to think of some way to make him seem ridiculous. On the eve of the Day of Atonement, he came to him and begged him that on this day, when each man forgives his neighbor, they too might become reconciled with each other. He had brought the rabbi a jar of very old and strong wine and urged him to drink, for he thought that, since the Tzadik was unused to drinking, he would become drunk and appear before his congregation in this condition. For the sake of reconciliation, Rabbi Shmelka drank one glass after another, and the rich man thought he had accomplished his purpose and went home well satisfied. But when evening fell and the hour of prayer drew near, the shudder of the day of judgment took hold of the rabbi, and in a moment every vestige of the effect of the wine had left him. After the evening prayer, Rabbi Shmelka remained in the house of prayer all night in the company of other devout people. Just as every year, he sang the psalms and the congregation joined in. When in the 41st psalm he came to the verse, "By this I know that thou delightest in me, mine enemy will not triumph over me," he repeated it over and over and translated it, but not in the usual way, but freely and boldly. "By this I know that you delight in me, my enemy will suffer no ill because of me." And he added, "Even though there are persons who are hostile to me and try to make me an object of ridicule, forgive them, Lord of the world, and let them not suffer because of me." And he said this in a voice so full of power that all those who were praying burst into tears, and each repeated his words from the bottom of his heart. But among them was that rich and distinguished man. In this hour he turned to God, and all his malice dropped from him. From this time on, he loved and honored Rabbi Shmelka above all other people. The commandment to love. A disciple asked Rabbi Shmelka, "We are commanded to love our neighbor as ourselves. How can I do this if my neighbor has wronged me?" The rabbi answered, "You must understand these words aright. Love your neighbor like something which you yourself are, for all souls are one. Each is a spark from the original soul, and this soul is wholly inherent in all souls, just as your soul is in all the members of your body. It may come to pass that your hand makes a mistake and strikes you. But would you then take a stick and chastise your hand because it lacked understanding, and so increase your pain? It is the same if your neighbor, who is of one soul with you, wrongs you for lack of understanding. If you punish him, you only hurt yourself." The disciple went on asking, "But if I see a man who is wicked before God, how can I love him?" "Don't you know," said Rabbi Shmelka, "that the original soul came out of the essence of God, and that every human soul is a part of God? And will you have no mercy on him when you see that one of his holy sparks has been lost in a maze? and is almost stifled? The ring. A poor man came to Rabbi Shmelki's door. There was no money in the house, so the rabbi gave him a ring. A moment later, his wife heard of it and heaped him with reproaches for throwing to an unknown beggar so valuable a piece of jewelry. With so large and precious a stone, Rabbi Shmelki had the poor man called back and said to him, "I have just learned that the ring I gave you is of great value. Be careful not to sell it for too little money." The messengers. A man came to Rabbi Shmelka and complained that he could not make a living, but had to keep on asking kind people to help him. He repeated the words of the prayer, "Let us not be in need of the gift of flesh and blood." Rabbi Shmelka said, "You must not read gift, but gifts, for there is one God, but many messengers to do his bidding." And that is what the verse means. Let us not be in need of the gifts we can consider only as the gifts of men. In the hour we take them, let us recognize the givers as your messengers. Poor man and rich man. Rabbi Shmelki said, "The poor man gives the rich man more than the rich gives the poor. More than the poor man needs the rich man, the rich is in need of the poor." Fruz. Be holy. A man once asked Rabbi Shmelka, "It is written, 'Ye shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Ye shall fear every man, his mother and his father. How can the lump of clay, which is the habitation of evil lusts, strive to acquire a quality which is God's?' And what connection is there between this summons to the superhuman and the commandment to fear father and mother, which is a human law for humans?" The rabbi replied, "According to the words of our sages, 3 are concerned with the creation of every child: God, Father, and Mother. God's part is all holy. The other parts can be sanctified and made as much like it as possible. That is what is meant by the commandment. You are holy, and yet you shall become holy. You must, therefore, shun the heritage of your father and mother, which you have within you, and which is opposed to holiness. You must not yield to it, but master it and shape it." Preparation. A disciple of Rabbi Shmelki's begged his master to teach him how to prepare his soul for the service of God. The Tzadik told him to go to Rabbi Abraham Hayim, who at that time was still an innkeeper. The disciple did as he was bidden, and lived in the inn for several weeks without observing any vestige of holiness in the innkeeper, who from the morning prayer till night devoted himself to his business. Finally, he asked him what he did all day. "My most important occupation," said Rabbi Abraham, "is to clean the dishes properly so that not the slightest trace of food is left, and to clean and dry the pots and pans so that they do not rust." When the disciple returned home and reported to Rabbi Shmelka what he had seen and heard, the rabbi said to him, "Now you know the answer to what you asked me." The test. They asked Rabbi Shmelki, "Why is the sacrifice of Isaac considered so glorious?" At that time, our father Abraham had already reached a high rung of holiness, and so it was no wonder that he immediately did as God asked him. He answered, "When man is tried, all the rungs and all holiness are taken from him. Stripped of everything he has attained, he stands face to face with him who is putting him to the test." Rather not. Rabbi Shmelki once said, "If I had the choice, I should rather not die. For in the coming world, there are no days of awe, and what can the soul of man do without the days of judgment?" Our generation. Once they asked Rabbi Shmelka, "Some find it difficult to believe that the Messiah could suddenly come in this, our trivial day and age. And how could our generation bring about what the Tanaim and Amoraim, the generations of knowledge, and the generations after them could not accomplish?" The Tzadik replied, "For many years, the host of a king besieged a well-fortified city. All kinds of troops, under the command of expert generals, advanced on the fortress again and again, with all the force of which they were capable, until finally they conquered. Then an army of workers was ordered to clear away the enormous amount of debris, so that a new beginning could be made, so that in the city he had vanquished, a new palace could be built for the victorious king. That is our generation. Thieves' luck. With regard to Rashi's comment, he whose ear heard, "Thou shalt not steal" on Mount Sinai, and then went and stole, his ear shall be pierced. Rabbi Shmelki said, before God gave his commandments down from Mount Sinai, everyone took good care that his property was not stolen from him. And because the thieves knew this, they did not try to steal. But after God spoke the words, "Thou shalt not steal," and men felt secure, the trade of thieving began to thrive. The brothers. Rabbi Shmelka of Nikolsburg was once entertaining his brother, Rabbi Pinhas, the Rav of Frankfurt, as his guest. Now, Rabbi Shmelka had always eaten in moderation, but in his old age he ate only a very little food and drank only a little water. When Rabbi Pinhas, who had not seen him for many years, noticed this, he said, "Here are two brothers of one father and mother. The one gobbles and guzzles like a beast. The other is like an angel of the Lord. He needs neither food nor drink, but savors the radiance of divine glory." Rabbi Shmelka replied, "Here are two brothers of one father and of one mother. The one is like a high priest, the other like a good house father. The high priest eats, and his eating is part of the sacrifice which shrives the house father." The ride on the Danube. It is told, dangerous plots against the Jews were brewing in the emperor's palace. Then Rabbi Shmelka and his disciple Moshe Leib of Sasov set out for Vienna to put an end to such plans. But it was freezing weather, and the Danube was full of ice floes. They boarded a narrow boat which could not hold more than 2 men. They stood up in it, and Rabbi Shmelka started singing the song which had been sung beside the Red Sea, and Moshe Leib sang the bass. And the little boat moved safely between the floes. In Vienna, the people ran down to the shore and stood there open-mouthed. Soon, the news of these strange arrivals reached the court. On the very same day, the empress received Rabbi Shmelki and granted his requests. The Amen to the Blessing. When Rabbi Shmelki felt he was going to die, he said to his Hasidim, "I did not want to tell you up to now, but now I must tell it while there is still time. You know that I have always been careful to say grace and blessings before eating and drinking and the like, in a place where there was someone who said, Amen. For each blessing begets an angel, and the angel is incomplete unless someone says Amen. But once, on a journey, I had to say a blessing in a lonely place, when after attending to my bodily needs, I washed my hands at a well, and there was no one anywhere around who could say Amen. Hardly had I begun to feel troubled about this when 2 men stood close before me, and before I had time to marvel at their size and grandeur, I was saying the blessing, and they answered, Amen, with overwhelming sweetness. But when I wanted to look at them more closely, a cloud carried them off. The soul of Samuel. On the 2nd day of Iyar, of the year 5538, Rabbi Shmelki summoned his disciples. He was sitting very erect in his big chair. His face was radiant, and his eyes as unclouded as always. He said to them, Today, you must know, is the day of my death. They began to weep, but he bade them stop, and continued, You must know that the soul of the prophet Samuel is within me. For this there are 3 outward signs. My name is Samuel. I am a Levite, as he was, and my life has lasted 52 years, just as his. But he was called Samuel, and I Shmelka, and so I remained Shmelka. Soon after this, he told his weeping disciples to leave him, leaned back, and died. Aaron of Carlin. The moment. In his youth, Rabbi Aaron of Carlin was fond of wearing fine clothes, and every day he went driving in a carriage. But a moment came when, as he was leaning back in his carriage, holy insight overwhelmed him, and he knew that he must leave this way of his and enter upon another. He leaned forward. His spirit surged up within him. He set foot on the carriage step and was flooded with the gift. He set foot on the earth, and all the firmaments were under the sway of his power. A whisper. On a Friday evening, after eating in the house of the Maggid of Mezritch, Rabbi Aaron returned to his inn and began to recite the Song of Songs in a whisper. Soon after, the Maggid servant came and knocked at his door. He said the Maggid could not sleep because the Song of Songs came roaring through his room. The long sleep. Once, when Rabbi Aaron was in the house of the great Maggid, along with other disciples, he was suddenly overcome with weariness. Without realizing what he was doing, he went into his teacher's room and lay down on his bed. Here he slept that whole day and all the following night. His companions wanted to wake him, but the Maggid would not let them. He said, "Now he is putting on the phylacteries of heaven." Delights. A Tzadik told this: "The delights of all the worlds wanted to reveal themselves to Rabbi Aaron, but he only shook his head. Even if they are delights," he said at last, "before I enjoy them, I want to sweat for them." The letter. Rabbi Aaron traveled through all of Russia, from one Jewish city to the next, in search of youths worth bringing his teacher, the great Maggid, as disciples, so that through them the Hasidic teachings might spread through the world. Once he came to the city of Amdur. Now he had heard that, beyond the town, in a lonely wood, lived a devout and learned man, Rabbi Hake, who kept aloof from the world and from men, and mortified his flesh. In order to bring him to the town, Rabbi Aaron preached in the house of prayer a number of times, and his words had a powerful effect, but it took a long time for the hermit to hear of it. When the hour for the next sermon drew near, something drove him to the house of prayer. When Rabbi Aaron heard he had come, he did not preach his sermon, but said only these words: "If a man does not grow better, he grows worse, like a poison which rouses the very core of life against itself." These words bit into the mind of the ascetic. He ran to the rabbi and begged him to help him out of the maze of error in which he had lost his way. "Only my teacher, the Maggid of Mezritch, can do that," said Rabbi Aaron. "Then give me a letter to him," said the man, "so that he may know who I am." And his request was granted, and he started out on his journey confident that before he spoke freely to the Maggid, the famous teacher would know that he had before him one of the great men of his generation. The Maggid opened the letter and obviously with deliberate intent read it aloud. It said that the man who was delivering it did not have a particle of sound goodness in him. Rabbi Hake burst into tears. Now, said the Maggid, "does what the Lithuanian writes really matter so much to you? Is it true or isn't it?" asked the other. "Well," said the Maggid, "if the Lithuanian says so, it is, very probably, true." "Then heal me, Rabbi," the ascetic begged him. For a whole year, the Maggid worked over him and healed him. Later, Rabbi Hake became one of the great men of his generation. The ring. Rabbi Aaron was once reciting the morning prayer in the house of prayer at Mezritch. As he was about to call out God as the king, tears gushed from his eyes, and he could not continue. After prayers, they asked him what had happened. He explained, "At that moment I thought of how Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai said to Vespasian, 'Peace be with you, O king. Peace be with you, O king.' And the Romans said to him in anger, 'You deserve the death penalty on 2 scores. First, I am not the king, yet you called me king. Secondly, supposing I was the king, why did you not come to me before now? As yet, God is not really king over the world, and I have a part in the blame that this is not so. For why have I still not accomplished the turning? Why have I still not come to him?" The chandelier. Rabbi Aaron of Chernobyl, son of a daughter of Aaron of Karlin, born long after he died and named after him, was denounced to the authorities and saved only by dint of bribes, which the Hasidim had given against his will. When he learned of this, he said, "Alas, how weak is my generation! If I stood on the rung of my grandfather, Rabbi Aaron the Great, wrong judgment could have been averted without resorting to bribery." And he went on to tell, Once the Hasidim in the Ukraine and Russia conspired against the Jews and resolved to kill them and seize their property. When word of this reached Mezritch, the heads of the community went to the holy Maggid and asked him what to do. Since he saw that Satan had succeeded in gaining the upper hand, he bade all, men, women, and children, hide in the woods around the town and take with them as much of their possessions as they could carry. One group of men hurried to the house of prayer to save the sacred utensils. From the ceiling hung a large pewter chandelier with 36 branches. My grandfather, Rabbi Aaron the Great, had acquired it with the money he had collected, kopek by kopek, among his disciples and the Hasidim of the Maggid. Every Friday, the holy Maggid himself used to light all the branches of this chandelier. It was the only thing left in the house of prayer. All the other utensils had been removed. My grandfather had been standing at a window, without paying any attention to what was happening around him. Suddenly, he noticed them getting at the chandelier. In a moment, he was in the middle of the hall. "Don't touch it!" he cried in a loud voice. Messengers went to the Maggid to tell him of the incident and find out what he wanted done. The Maggid listened to what they had to say and was silent for a time. Then he said, "All the men, women, and children shall gather in the house of prayer." When my grandfather saw the entire community gathering in the house of prayer, he sent word to the Maggid to beg him to come and take pity on him. The Maggid gave no reply. Again my grandfather sent to implore him to give him aid of any kind. The Maggid did not reply. The house of prayer was filled with the Jews of the community of Mezritch. They were all there, men, women, and children. Only the Maggid was missing. Then a man, who had been keeping watch outside, came and reported to my grandfather that the Hasidim were in the city. My grandfather went out and placed himself in the entrance to the house of prayer. When the Hasidim advanced toward him, he hurled the words of the psalm at them in a voice of thunder. "Why are the nations in an uproar?" The leader of the Hasidim was seized with madness and began to hit out at his own people. They scattered and fled. On the earth. This is what Rabbi Aaron of Karlin said concerning the words in the scriptures. "A ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. If a man of Israel has himself firmly in hand and stands solidly on the earth, then his head reaches up to heaven." Nothing at all. They asked Rabbi Aaron what he had learned from his teacher, the great Maggid. "Nothing at all," he said. And when they pressed him to explain what he meant by that, he added, "The nothing at all is what I learned. I learned the meaning of nothingness. I learned that I am nothing at all, and that I am notwithstanding." The little fear and the great fear. Rabbi Shneur Zalman told this about his friend, Rabbi Aaron of Karlin, who died young. His fear of God was like the fear of a man who is going to be shot and stands at the wall and sees the muzzle of the gun pointed at his heart and looks straight into the muzzle, full of fear and yet undaunted. But this was only his little fear of God, his everyday fear. When the great fear of God came over him, no comparison suffices to describe that. Unworthiness and the hearing of prayers. They asked Rabbi Aaron concerning Moses' prayer to God to pardon his people. The commentary says, "that they may not say, 'I was unworthy to plead for mercy in their behalf.' Is not this contrary to the testimony in the scriptures that Moses was meek above all other men? Just because he was so meek," the Tzadik replied, "he said to God, 'Hear my prayer, though I am not worthy of it, so that they may not say that the unworthiness of man became manifest through me, and stop pleading to you with all the strength of their hearts, but rather that they may realize that you hear the prayer of any mouth at all.'" I, a disciple of the great Maggid, had received instruction from him for several years and was now starting on his journey home. On the way, he decided to stop in Karlin to visit Rabbi Aaron, who for a time had been his companion in the Maggid's house of study. It was nearly midnight when he reached the city, but his desire to see his friend was so great that he at once went to his house and knocked at the lit window. He heard the dear, familiar voice ask, "Who is it?" and certain that his own voice would be recognized, he answered nothing but the word, "I." But the window remained closed, and no other sound came from within, though he knocked again and again. At last he cried out in distress, "Aaron, why don't you open for me?" Then his friend replied, but his voice was so grave and solemn that it sounded almost strange to him. "Who is it that dares call himself I as befits only God himself?" When the disciple heard this, he said to himself, "I have not learned nearly enough," and without delaying, he returned to Mezritch. Conversion. Rabbi Aaron once came to the city where little Mordecai, who later became the rabbi of Lechevitz, was growing up. His father brought the boy to the visiting rabbi and complained that he did not persevere in his studies. "Leave the boy with me for a while," said Rabbi Aaron. When he was alone with little Mordecai, he lay down and took the child to his heart. Silently, he held him to his heart until his father returned. "I have given him a good talking to," he said. "From now on, he will not be lacking in perseverance." Whenever the rabbi of Lechevitz related this incident, he added, "That was when I learned how to convert men." The greeting. A grandnephew of Rabbi Aaron related, "At the close of the Sabbath, when I sat at his table while they said the Elijah song, I noticed that he and his son, Rabbi Asher, clasped hands under the table. At the words, 'Hail to him who greeted him, and to him whom he greeted.' And I understand what this meant. Elijah had assumed the shape of the Father, and the Father wanted to accord his Son the grace of the greeting." End quote. Permission. It is told, Passover was coming, and Rabbi Aaron, who was in Mezritch, wanted to go home for the holidays. He asked and received the Maggid's permission. But hardly had he left the house when the Maggid called some of his disciples and said to them, "Go to Aaron's inn at once and talk him out of going to Carlin." They went and tried to persuade their friend to celebrate the festival with them. When they failed to make any impression on him, they gave away that it was the Maggid himself who had sent them. Immediately, Aaron hurried to him and said, "Rabbi, it is very necessary for me to go home, and now I am told that you wish me to spend the holidays with you. Is that so?" "I shall not keep you," said the rabbi. "If it is necessary for you to go, go in peace." But when Aaron had left, he again said to his disciples, "Don't let him go." This recurred one more time, but since the Maggid did not give him instructions to the contrary, Rabbi Aaron would not listen to what seemed sheer foolery and left for Carlin. When he entered his house, he had to lie down, and he died 3 days later. He was 36 years old. When the Maggid heard of his death, he quoted the saying of our sages, "When Aaron died, the clouds of glory vanished," and he added, "He was our weapon. What are we to do in the world now?" The disciples reproached their Maggid for allowing this radiant and holy man to go to his death. "Why didn't you tell him?" they asked. "What was given a man to administer, he must faithfully administer," he said. The Maggid died the following autumn. The foolish thing. Rabbi Asher, son of Rabbi Aaron, told, "When I went to see Rabbi Penius of Koretz, I did not tell him who I was, but he said, 'Your father is walking behind you.' After a while, he added, 'Your father has done a foolish thing.' I was frightened, for I knew that whatever Rabbi Penius said about a Tzadik, and even if he had been in the upper world these 500 years, reached the ears of heavenly judgment. 'The foolish thing your father has done,' he went on to say, 'was not to live longer than he did.'" 3 generations. When Rabbi Israel of Rizhin betrothed his son, Rabbi Abraham, Jacob, later the rabbi of Sadagora, to a daughter of Rabbi Aaron of Carlin, a grandson of the great Rabbi Aaron, and the engagement contract was being written, he said, "It is our custom, at a time such as this, to recite the genealogy of the bride's father. The great Rabbi Aaron was the truth of the world. His son, Rabbi Asher, the grandfather of the bride, has always been close on the track of truth. And the father of the bride, if he knew that a crumb of truth was hidden under a floorboard, he would tear up the floor with his bare hands." Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev. he who was also there. When Levi Yitzhak was young, a rich man chose him for his son-in-law because of his amazing gifts, for such was the custom. As a mark of respect for his prominent father-in-law, they honored him in the first year of his marriage by asking him to recite the passage, "Unto thee it was shown," before the congregation in the house of prayer. On the day of rejoicing in the law, he went to the pulpit and, for a while, stood motionless. Then he put out his hand to take his prayer shawl, but laid it down again and stood without moving as before. The heads of the community bade the servant whisper to him not to weary the assemblage, but to begin. "Very well," he said, and took the prayer shawl in his hand. But when he had almost covered his shoulders, he laid it back. His father-in-law was ashamed before the congregation, especially since he had often boasted of the excellent young man he had gained for his house. Angrily, he sent him a message, either to begin the prayer or leave the pulpit. But even before Levi Yitzhak was told these words, his voice suddenly rang through the hall. "If you are versed in the teachings, if you are a Hasid," he said, "then speak the prayer." And with this, he returned to his place. His father-in-law said nothing. But when they were at home, and Levi Yitzhak sat opposite him at the festive board, his face bright with the joy befitting the day, he could contain himself no longer, and shouted, "Why did you bring this disgrace upon me, their oldest problem?" The rabbi replied, "When I first put out my hand to draw the prayer shawl over my head, the evil urge came and whispered in my ear, 'I want to say, unto thee it was shown, with you.' I asked, 'Who are you that you regard yourself worthy to do this?' And he, 'Who are you that you regard yourself worthy to do this?' 'I am versed in the teachings,' I said. 'I too am versed in the teachings,' he replied. I thought to put an end to this idle talk and said contemptuously, 'Where did you study? Where did you study?' He countered. I told him, 'But I was right there with you,' he murmured laughingly. 'I studied there in your company.' I pondered for a moment. 'I am a Hasid,' I informed him triumphantly. And he, unperturbed, 'I too am a Hasid.' I, 'To what Tzadik did you travel?' And he, again echoing me, 'To whom did you travel?' 'To the holy Maggid of Mezritch,' I replied. Whereupon he laughed still more derisively. 'But I tell you that I was there with you and became a Hasid just as you did. And that is why I want to say with you, unto thee it was shown.' Then I had enough of it. I left him. What else could El have done? In Tanner's Alley. On one of his journeys, as night was falling, Levi Yitzhak came to a little town where he knew no one at all, nor could he find a lodging, until finally a tanner took him home with him. He wanted to say the evening prayer, but the smell of the hides was so penetrating that he could not utter a word. So he left and went to the house of study, which was quite empty, and there he prayed. And then, suddenly, he understood how the divine presence had descended to exile, and now with bowed head stood in Tanner's Alley. He burst into tears and wept until he had cried his heart out over the sorrow of the divine presence, and he fell in a faint. And then he saw the glory of God in all its splendor, a dazzling light ranged in 24 rungs of divers colors, and heard the words, "Be strong, my son. Great suffering will come upon you, but have no fear, for I shall be with you." In transport. On the morning of the Feast of Tabernacles, when Rabbi Levi Yitzhak was about to reach into the chest where the citron and the sheaf of palm, myrtle, and willows of the brook awaited the blessing, he thrust his hand through the glass lid and did not mark that he had cut himself. At the Feast of Hanukkah, when he saw the holy lights burning, he was impelled to put his bare hand into the flame, yet felt no hurt. At the Feast of Purim, before the book of Esther was read, he danced during the benediction, danced on the desk, and almost on the scroll itself. When he had drawn water for the baking of the unleavened bread, he was so enraptured at fulfilling this holy rite that he fell into the well. When at the Seder he said the word matzah, that is, unleavened bread, he was so moved with fervor that he threw himself under the table and tipped it over with the Seder bowl. unleavened bread, and the wine, so that all had to be prepared anew. He donned the fresh clothing they brought him, and like one savoring an exquisite morsel said, this matzah. The bath. It is told, when Rabbi Levi Yitzhak had become Rav in Berdichev, those who opposed his teachings beset him with hostilities. Among these was a group so unfalteringly faithful to the memory of the great Rabbi Lieber, who had lived and taught in Berdichev and died 15 years before, that they did not want to have anything to do with the innovator. Once Rabbi Levi Yitzhak had them come to him and told them that he intended to immerse himself in Rabbi Lieber's bath. Now, Rabbi Lieber had never had a true bath. What they called his bath was nothing but a roof on 4 posts, and under it, a pit full of water. In winter, Rabbi Lieber used to break the ice with an axe and then immerse himself for his holy ablutions. After his death, the roof had caved in and mud gathered in the pit, and so the Tzadik was told that to bathe in it was impossible. But he was firm in his purpose and hired 4 workingmen who dug for a whole day. So it went for a number of days. His enemies laughed at this curious new Rav. It was quite obvious, so they said that Rabbi Lieber did not wish his bath to be used. Rabbi Levi Yitzhak asked all those of his intimates who had known Rabbi Lieber to assemble early the following morning. He himself went to the bath with them, and once more the workmen began to dig. After 2 hours, one of them cried out, "I see water." Soon, they reported that more water had collected. "There is no need to dig any further," said the rabbi. He took off his clothes and, keeping only his cap on his head, went down into the pit. When he stepped into the water, everyone there saw that it barely lapped his ankles, but in a moment it had risen to his mouth. Then he asked, "Is there anybody here who remembers Rabbi Lieber in his youth?" They answered that in the new part of the city lived a beadle who was 116 years old and had served Rabbi Lieber when he was young. The Tzadik sent for him and waded in the water which reached to his mouth. At first the old man refused to come, but when he was told what had happened, he went with the man who had come to fetch him. "Do you still remember the beadle?" the rabbi asked him, "who hanged himself from the chandelier in the house of prayer?" "Surely I remember him," the old man answered in surprise. "But how are you concerned with him? All that was a good 70 years ago, long before you were born. Tell us about it," said the rabbi. The old man told. He was a simple man, but he was very devout, and he had his own way of doing things. On Wednesday of every week he began to polish the great chandelier hanging from the ceiling for the Sabbath, and while he did this he always said, "I do this for the sake of God." But one Friday afternoon, when people came to the house of prayer, they found him hanging from the chandelier in a noose knotted of his belt. The rabbi said, that time, on the day before the Sabbath, when everything had been cleaned and polished, and there was nothing more to be done, the simple beadle asked himself, "What more can I do in honor of God? What more can I do in His honor?" His poor, weak mind grew confused, and because of all the great things in the world, to him the chandelier had always been greatest. He hanged himself from it in honor of God. And now that 70 years have passed since that day, Rabbi Lieber appeared to me in a dream and told me to do whatever could be done to release the soul of that simple man. Therefore, I had the holy bath restored and immersed myself. Now tell me, is the hour come for the release of that poor soul? "Yes, yes, yes," they all called as if with a single voice. Then I too say, "Yes, yes, yes," said the rabbi. "Go in peace." With that he came out of the water, and the water sank so that it would barely have lapped his ankles. Rabbi Levi Yitzhak had a bathhouse built in that place, and had the old bath restored. For himself, he had another dug next to it. Only when he was about to prepare for some difficult work did he use the bath of Rabbi Lieber. Even today, the house with the 2 baths still stands in the old part of the city, near the Klaus, and they still call the one that of Rabbi Lieber, and the other that of Rabbi Levi Yitzhak. Passover night. Soon after Rabbi Levi Yitzhak had been received as Rav by the community of Berdichev, He prayed with great ardor on the first evening of the feast of Passover, and this lasted for so many hours that the congregation grew tired of waiting, finished their prayers, and went home to prepare the Seder meal. Only one man remained, one of those poor wayfarers from another place who, according to the custom, was to take the festive meal at the house of one of the burghers. He had been told that the Jew just reading the prayer was to be his host, and because he was weary with the day's journey, he lay down on a bench and was soon fast asleep. Meantime, the rabbi had finished the silent prayer of benedictions. When he saw that all the people had gone home, he cried, "O angels, angels on high, descend on this holy day in praise of the Lord. Blessed be he." At this, the stranger half woke from a deep sleep. Still drowsy and dazed, he heard rushing sounds surge through the house and was terrified to the core of his being. But the rabbi recited the hymns in great happiness. Then he caught sight of the stranger and asked him why he alone had remained. The man, who was now fully awake, told him how it had come about, and the rabbi asked him to go to the Seder with him. But the stranger was timid and dared not accept. He seemed to fear that in lieu of food, secret words that work magic would fall to his share. "Calm yourself," said the rabbi. "You will eat at my house just what you would eat at the table of other burghers." Then the man decided to go with him. The doubting innkeeper. The owner of a tavern in Berdichev, where mead was dispensed, was not in favor of the Hasidic way of life, but liked to listen when Hasidim told each other of the deeds of their leaders. On one such occasion, he heard them speak of the praying of Rabbi Levi Yitzhak in the Sabbath service, when so they told the rabbi came to the words, "Holy, holy, holy," in the chanting of which denizens of heaven unite with men. The angels came to listen to what his lips were saying. "Do you really think that this is so?" asked the innkeeper. "Yes, it is so," they said. "And where do the angels go after that?" he inquired. "Do they remain floating in air?" "No," they answered him. "They fly down and stand around the rabbi." "And where do you go in the meantime?" "When the rabbi begins to sing mightily and dances so mightily through all the house, there is no room for us inside." "Well," said the innkeeper, "I shall see this matter for myself. He won't get me to budge from the spot." At the feast of the new moon, when the rabbi began to burn with ecstasy, the innkeeper came up close behind him. The rabbi, in his great fervor, turned around, seizing him by the coattails, shook him, pushed him, and thus, shaking and pushing him alternately, dragged him from one end of the house to the other, and back again. The innkeeper hardly knew what was happening to him. He was almost out of his mind. There was a roaring in his ears as of a tremendous surge. Rallying the last shreds of his strength, he wrenched himself free from the hands of the Tzadik and fled. From that time on, he too believed that other powers were involved than merely those of this earth. For Israel. Before reciting the prayer of benedictions on New Year's Day, the rabbi of Berdichev sang, "The dwellers above and the dwellers below, they shake and they quake in the fear of your name. The dwellers in chasms, the dwellers in graves, they quiver and shiver for fear of your name. But the just, in the pales of paradise, break into acclaim and sing your name. That is why I, Levi Yitzhak, son of Sarah, am come before you with pleas and with prayers. What have you to do with Israel? To whom do you speak? To the children of Israel. To whom do you give commandments? To the children of Israel. Whom do you bid say the benedictions? The children of Israel. And so, I ask you, what have you to do with Israel? Are there not plenty of Chaldeans, and Medes, and Persians? It must be that they are dear to you. The children of Israel, children of God they are called. Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, King of the world." The true King. On another New Year's Day, he prefaced the liturgy of the sanctification of God in this wise: Fonye, a nickname current among the Jews, to designate the Russians here used to designate the Tsar, says he is king. And then he proceeded to enumerate the rulers of great countries, calling each by his nickname. In the end, he shouted with joy and cried, "But I say, Glorified and sanctified be his great name. A deal. In the middle of a prayer, Rabbi Levi Yitzhak said, "Lord of all the world, a time there was when you went around with that Torah of yours and were willing to sell it at a bargain like apples that have gone bad. Yet no one would buy it from you. No one would even look at you. And then we took it. Because of this, I want to propose a deal. We have many sins and misdeeds, and you an abundance of forgiveness and atonement. Let us exchange." But perhaps you will say, like for like. My answer is, had we no sins, what would you do with your forgiveness? So you must balance the deal by giving us life and children and food besides. An interruption. On the forenoon of the Day of Atonement, when the rabbi of Berditchev came to that place, in the recital of the temple service, where the high priest sprinkles the atoning drops of blood and has to say the words, "And thus did he count, 1, 1 and 1, 1 and 2, 1 and 3. He was so overwhelmed with fervor that when he had said 1 the second time, he fell on the floor and lay as one dead. In vain did those standing near seek to revive him. They lifted him from the floor, carried him to his room, and laid him on his bed. Then the Hasidim, who knew very well that this was a state which had to do with the soul, and not a sickness of the body, continued in prayer. Toward evening they had just begun to say the closing prayer. The rabbi rushed in, and up to the pulpit, shouting, "And 1." Then he bethought himself and said the prayers in the correct sequence. Struggle. Once, on the Day of Atonement, the rabbi of Berditchev was praying in the synagogue of Lao. In the middle of the additional prayer, he suddenly stopped, and the people heard him say in Polish in a threatening voice, "I'll show you." During the evening meal, the son of the rabbi of Luau said to him of Berditchev, "I shall not take the liberty of criticizing your manner of praying, but may I ask you one thing? How could you interrupt your prayer?" And with Polish words at that, the rabbi of Berditchev replied, "I managed to down my other enemies, but this was the only way I could get the better of the prince demon of Poland." The wish. Every year, on the Day of Atonement, a woman came to Berditchev to pray with the congregation of Rabbi Levi Yitzhak. Once, she was delayed, and when she reached the house of prayer, night had already fallen. The woman was vexed and sorrowful, for she was certain the evening service must be over. But the rabbi had not even begun. He had waited for the woman to come and his astonished congregation with him. When she grew aware that he had not yet recited all vows, she was filled with great joy and said to God, "Lord of the world, what shall I wish you in return for the good you have vouchsafed me? I wish you may have as much joy of your children as you have just now granted me." Then, even while she was speaking, an hour replete with the grace of God came upon the world. How to weigh. Once, when the Day of Atonement was over, Shemuel, the rabbi of Berditchev's favorite disciple, came into his master's room to see how he was after the long fast and the almost superhuman fervor he had put into the day's service. Although the night was well advanced, the Tzadik's cup of coffee still stood before him untasted. When he saw his disciple, he said, "Good that you have come, Shemuel. Now I can tell it. For you must know that today Satan preferred charges against the judgment of heaven. You, the court of justice," he said. "Tell me why this is. When a man steals a ruble from his fellow, you weigh the coin in order to measure his sin. But if a man gives his fellow a ruble out of charity, you weigh the recipient and all the persons in his house who have been benefited by the gift. Why do you not merely weigh the coin in this instance too? Or why, in the first instance, do you not put in the scales the man who has been robbed and all those who have suffered because of the robbery?" Then I came forward and explained, "A benefactor wishes to preserve the lives of people, and so the people must be weighed. But the robber wants only the money. He does not even think of the people he is taking it from, and that is why, in this instance, the coin alone need be weighed." That was how I silenced the plaintiff. The Song of You. The rabbi of Berdichev used to sing a song, part of which is as follows. Where I wander you, where I ponder you, only you, you again, always you, 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 you. When I am gladdened, you, when I am saddened, you, only you, you again, always you, 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 you. Sky is you, earth is you, you above, you below, in every trend, at every end, only you, you again, always you, 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 you. Suffering and prayer. Whenever Rabbi Levi Yitzhak came to that passage in the Haggadah of Passover, which deals with the 4 sons, and in it read about the 4th son, about him who knows not how to ask, he said, "The one who knows not how to ask, that is myself, Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev. I do not know how to ask you, Lord of the world, and even if I did know, I could not bear to do it. How could I venture to ask you why everything happens as it does, why we are driven from one exile into another, why our foes are allowed to torment us so? But in the Haggadah, the father of him who knows not how to ask is told, it is for you to disclose it to him. And the Haggadah refers to the scriptures, in which it is written, and thou shalt tell thy son, and, Lord of the world, am I not your son? I do not beg you to reveal to me the secret of your ways. I could not bear it. But show me one thing. Show it to me more clearly and more deeply. Show me what this, which is happening at this very moment, means to me, what it demands of me, what you, Lord of the world, are telling me by way of it. Ah, it is not why I suffer that I wish to know, but only whether I suffer for your sake." His wife's prayer. A prayer has come down to us from Pearl, the rabbi of Berdichev's wife. Whenever she kneaded and baked the loaves for the Sabbath, she prayed, "Lord of the world, I beg you to help me that, when my husband Levi Yitzhak says the blessing upon these loaves on the Sabbath, he may have in his mind what I have in my mind, this very hour that I knead them and bake them." 2 kinds of praying. Once, on the eve of the Sabbath, Rabbi Levi Yitzhak prayed before the congregation of a town in which he was stopping as a guest. As always, now too he drew out the prayer, far beyond its usual length, through the many exclamations and gestures not provided for in any liturgy. When he had finished, the Rav of that town went up to him, proffered the Sabbath greetings, and asked, "Why are you not more careful not to tire the congregation? Do not our sages relate of Rabbi Akiba that whenever he prayed with the congregation, he did so quickly, but that when he prayed alone, he yielded himself to his transports, so that frequently he began in one corner of the room and ended up in another?" End quote. The rabbi of Berdichev replied, "How is it possible to assume that Rabbi Akiba, with his countless disciples, hastened his prayer in order not to tire the congregation? For surely every member of it was more than happy to listen to his master hour after hour." The meaning of this Talmudic story is more likely this: when Rabbi Akiba really prayed with the congregation, that is to say, when the congregation felt at heart the same fervor as he, his prayer could well be short, for he had to pray only for himself. But when he prayed alone, that is to say, when he prayed with his congregation, but his was the only heart fervent among them, he had to draw out his prayer to lift their hearts to the level of his. With open eyes. Once Rabbi Levi Yitzhak told the Maggid of Mezritch, whose guest he was, that he intended going to Vilna, the center of the opponents of Hasidic teachings, in order to debate with them. "I should like to ask you a question," said the Maggid. "Why do you go contrary to the custom, in that you recite the 18 benedictions with open eyes?" "Dear heart," said the rabbi of Berdichev, "do you think that when I do this, I see anything at all?" "I know very well," the Maggid replied, "that you see nothing whatsoever. But what will you say to those others when they ask you this question?" The horse reader. In the congregation of Rabbi Levi Yitzhak, there was a reader who had grown hoarse. The rabbi asked him, "How is it that you are hoarse?" "Because I prayed before the pulpit," answered the other. "Quite right," said the rabbi. "If one prays before the pulpit, one grows hoarse. But if one prays before the living God, then one does not grow hoarse. It's bland." The absent ones. Once, after he had recited the 18 benedictions, the rabbi of Berdichev went up to certain persons in the house of prayer and greeted them, saying, "Peace be with you," several times over, as though they had just come back from a long journey. When they looked at him in surprise, he said, "Why are you so astonished? You were far away, weren't you? You in a marketplace, and you on a ship with a cargo of grain, and when the sound of praying ceased, you returned, and so I greeted you." Babbling sounds. Rabbi Levi Yitzhak once came to an inn where many merchants were stopping on the way to market their wares. The place was far from Berdichev, and so no one knew the Tzadik. In the early morning, the guests wanted to pray, but since there was only a single pair of phylacteries in the whole house, one after another put them on and rattled off his prayer and handed them on to the next. When they had all prayed, the rabbi called the young men to him, saying that he wanted to ask them something. When they had come close, he looked gravely into their faces and said, "Ma, va, va. What do you mean?" cried the young men. But he only repeated the same meaningless syllables. Then they took him for a fool. But now he said, "How is it you do not understand this language, which you yourselves have just used in speaking to God?" For a moment, the young men were taken aback and stood silent. Then one of them said, "Have you never seen a child in the cradle who does not yet know how to put sounds together into words? Have you not heard him make babbling sounds, such as ma, va? All the sages and scholars in the world cannot understand him, but the moment his mother comes, she knows exactly what he means." End quote. When the rabbi heard this answer, he began to dance for joy, and from that time on, whenever on the days of awe he spoke to God in his own fashion, in the midst of prayer, he never failed to tell this answer to him. The foolish prayer. At the close of the Day of Atonement, the rabbi of Berdichev said to one of his Hasidim, "I know what you prayed for this day. On the eve, you begged God to give you the 1,000 rubles which you need in order to live and usually earn in the course of a year, all at once, at the beginning of the year, so that the toil and trouble of business may not distract you from learning and prayer. But in the morning you thought better of it and decided that if you had the 1,000 rubles all at once, you would probably launch a new and bigger business enterprise, which would take up even more of your time. And so you begged to receive half the amount every half year. And before the closing prayer, this too seemed precarious to you, and you expressed the wish for quarterly installments, so you might learn and pray quite undisturbed. But what makes you think that your learning and praying is needed in heaven? Perhaps what is needed there is that you toil and rack your brains." The end of prayers. At the close of the 72nd Psalm are the words, "And let the whole earth be filled with his glory. Amen and amen." The prayers of David, the son of Jesse, are ended. Concerning this, Rabbi Levi Yitzhak said, "All prayers and hymns are a plea to have his glory revealed throughout the world. But if once the whole earth is, indeed, filled with it, there will be no further need to pray." End quote. End quote. Worldly talk. When Rabbi Levi Yitzhak came to Nikolsburg to visit Rabbi Shmelke, who had taught him the way of fervor when he was young, and whom he had not seen in a long time, he went into the kitchen, covered with his prayer shawl and with double phylacteries on his forehead, and asked Rabbi Shmelke's wife on this very first morning what dishes were being prepared for the noonday meal. His question, though rather surprising, was answered. Then he went on to ask whether the cooks had really mastered their art, and other things of the same sort. Rabbi Shmelke's disciples, who heard of this, took him for a veritable glutton. He, however, now entered the house of prayer, and while the congregation prayed, began to talk to an utterly insignificant man, despised by all, on quite unimportant worldly subjects, as those standing near could determine. One of the disciples could not bear to observe such behavior any longer and said roughly to the stranger, "Silence! Idle chatter is forbidden here." But the rabbi of Berdichev paid no attention to him and continued his conversation. At the midday meal, Rabbi Shmelka greeted him joyfully, bade him sit at his side, and ate from the same bowl as he. His disciples, who had heard of the curious manners of the visitor, marked these signs of favor and friendship with sullen surprise. When the meal was over, one of them could no longer suppress his annoyance and asked his master why he showered honors on so empty-headed and impudent a man who had behaved in such and such a way. The Tzadik replied, "In the Gemara we read, Rab Abba Areka, for all the days of his life never spoke of worldly matters." Is this praise not strange? Does it indicate that the other masters spent their time in worldly talk? Can nothing worthier be told of Rab? The meaning is this: whatever worldly affairs he discussed with people in the course of the day, each of his words was, in reality, filled with secret significance and a secret purpose, and made itself felt in the higher world, and his spirit remained steadfast in such service all day long. That is why our sages have accorded him praise of which none other was found worthy. What others could do for only 3 hours, after which they sank from this level, he could do throughout the day. And the same is true of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. What I can do for only 3 hours, he can do the whole day through. Concentrate his spirit, so that it makes itself felt in the world of heaven, even with talk which men consider idle. He who laughed. Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sasov was deeply devoted to the Tzadik of Berdichev. His disciple Abraham David, later the rabbi of Bukchaks, besieged his master for permission to go to that other, whose manner of teaching he wished very much to observe at close quarters. Rabbi Moshe Leib did not want to grant his request. In the book of Daniel, he said, we read that they had ability to stand in the king's palace. Our sages explained these words in this way, that they had learned to restrain themselves from laughing, sleeping, and other things besides. Now Rabbi Levi Yitzchak never ceases to burn with unfailing fire. Into all he does, he puts his flame-like soul, and so he who ventures into his presence must be very sure he is able to contain his laughter at observing the curious gestures of the holy man when he prays and when he eats. Is that? The disciple promised he would not give way to laughter, and so the rabbi of Sasov permitted him to go to Berdichev for the Sabbath. But when, at table, he saw the convulsive movements of the Tzadik and the faces he made, he could no longer control himself and burst out laughing. Then he fell into a frenzy. His fits of laughter recurred over and over. Finally, he had to be led away from the table, and when the Sabbath was over, sent back to Sasov under guard. When Rabbi Moshe Leib saw him, he wrote to the Tzadik, "I sent you a vessel which was whole, and you gave it back to me in pieces." The sickness of Abraham David lasted 30 days. Then he was suddenly well. From that time on, he gave a feast of thanks on the anniversary of that day, and on this occasion told the story of his visit to Berdichev, ending with the words of the psalm, "Give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endureth forever." Day after day, every evening, the rabbi of Berdichev examined in his heart what he had done on that day and repented every flaw he discovered. He said, "Levi Yitzhak will not do this again." Then he chided himself. Levi Yitzhak said exactly the same thing yesterday, and added, "Yesterday, Levi Yitzhak did not speak the truth, but he does speak the truth today." He used to say, like a woman who suffers overwhelming pain in childbirth and swears she will never lie with her husband again, and yet forgets her oath. So on every day of atonement, we confess our faults and promise to turn, and yet we go on sinning, and you go on forgiving us. Eternal beginnings. A student asked the rabbi of Berdichev, "The Talmud teaches that those who are perfect in righteousness cannot stand in that place where those stand who turn to God. According to this, One who has been stainless from youth comes after one who has transgressed against God many times and cannot attain to his rung? The Tzadik replied, He who sees a new light every day, light he did not see the day before, if he wishes truly to serve, must condemn his imperfect service of yesterday, atone for it, and start afresh. The stainless one who believes he has done perfect service and persists in it does not accept the light, and comes after him whoever turns anew. Envy. Walking in the street, the rabbi of Berdichev once went up to a man who held an important office and was as evil-minded as he was powerful, took hold of the hem of his coat, and said, Sir, I envy you. When you turn to God, each of your flaws will become a ray of light, and you will shine with a great light. Sir, I envy you, your flood of radiance. The Seder of the Ignorant Man. Once Rabbi Levi Yitzhak held the Seder of the first night of Passover so devoutly that every word and every rite glowed at the Tzadik's table with all the holiness of its secret significance. In the dawn after the celebration, Rabbi Levi Yitzhak sat in his room, joyful and proud that he had performed so successful a service. But of a sudden, he heard a voice saying, More pleasing to me than your Seder is that of Hayim, the water carrier. The rabbi summoned the people in his house and his disciples, and inquired about the man whose name he had heard. Nobody knew him. At the Tzadik's bidding, some of his disciples went in search of him. They had to ask around for a long time before, at the outskirts of the city, where only poor people live, they were shown the house of Hayim, the water carrier. They knocked at the door. A woman came out and asked what they wanted. When they told her, she was amazed. Yes, she said, Hayim, the water carrier, is my husband. But he cannot go with you because he drank a lot yesterday and is sleeping it off now. If you wake him, you will find that he cannot manage to lift his feet. All they said in reply was, It is the rabbi's orders. They went and shook him from his sleep. He only blinked at them, could not understand what they wanted him for, and attempted to turn over and go on sleeping. But they raised him from his bed, took hold of him, and between them brought him to the Tzadik, all but carrying him on their shoulders. The rabbi had him put in a chair near him. When he was seated, silent and bewildered, Levi Yitzhak leaned toward him and said, Rabbi Hayim, dear heart, what mystic intention was in your mind when you gathered what is leavened? The water carrier looked at him dully, shook his head, and replied, Master, I just looked into every corner and gathered it together. The astonished Tzadik continued questioning him. And what consecration did you think upon in the burning of it? The man pondered, looked distressed, and said hesitatingly, Master, I forgot to burn it, and now I remember it is all still lying on the shelf. When Rabbi Levi Yitzhak heard this, he grew more and more uncertain, but he continued asking, And tell me, Rabbi Hayim, how did you celebrate the Seder? Then something seemed to quicken in the eyes and limbs of the man, and he replied in humble tones, Rabbi, I shall tell you the truth. You see, I always heard that it is forbidden to drink brandy the 8 days of the festival. So yesterday morning I drank enough to last me 8 days, and so I got tired and fell asleep. Then my wife woke me, and it was evening, and she said to me, Why don't you celebrate the Seder like all other Jews? Said I, What do you want with me? I am an ignorant man, and my father was an ignorant man, and I don't know what to do and what not to do. But one thing I know, our fathers and mothers were in captivity in the land of the gypsies, and we have a God, and he led them out and into freedom. And see, now we are again in captivity, and I know. And I tell you that God will lead us to freedom too. And then I saw before me a table, and the cloth gleamed like the sun, and on it were platters with matzot and eggs and other dishes, and bottles of red wine. I ate of the matzot and eggs and drank of the wine, and gave my wife to eat and to drink. And then I was overcome with joy, and lifted my cup to God, and said, See, God, I drink this cup to you. And do you lean down to us and make us free? So we sat and drank and rejoiced before God. And then I felt tired, lay down, and fell asleep. At the holy feast of the 7 shepherds, Rabbi Levi Yitzhak often welcomed at his table an honest and untaught man whom his disciples regarded askance because they thought him incapable of understanding what the rabbi said. And what business has one who boils pitch among those who compound ointments? But because the man was good-natured and simple, he either did not notice the attitude of the rabbi's disciples or did not let it ruffle him, so that finally they asked the Tzaddik's wife to show the lout the door. Since she did not want to do this without her husband's permission, she reported to him the misgivings and the request of his disciples. The rabbi replied, "When the 7 shepherds once sit at the holy feast, Adam, Seth, Methuselah to the right, Abraham, Jacob, Moses to the left, David in the middle, and a poor untutored man, Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev, goes up to them, I believe they will even nod to that lout." Moses and Mount Sinai. Once the rabbi of Berdichev was asked this question: how is it that Moses, who in his great humility had implored God not to send him but another to Pharaoh, did not for a single instant hesitate to receive the Torah? He had seen the tall mountains come before God, said the rabbi, and each begged the privilege of being the one on which the revelation should come to pass. But God chose little Mount Sinai. That is why when he saw that he too was chosen, Moses did not resist, but followed the call. His second name. Rabbi Levi Yitzhak's second name was Barmdigger, merciful, and by this name, which was, however, not his father's, he was known to the authorities and inscribed in their books. And this was how it happened. The king issued a decree that everyone must add to his name a second name, and since the Jews were slow to obey, the sheriff of Berdichev went from house to house to enforce the new law. When he crossed Rabbi Levi Yitzhak's threshold and mumbled his question by rote, the Tzadik looked at him, as one human being looks at another, and ignoring the question said, "Endeavor to imitate the quality of God. As he is merciful, so you too shall be merciful." But the sheriff only pulled out his list and noted down, first name, Levi Yitzhak, second name, merciful. The phylacteries of God. In the middle of a prayer, the rabbi of Berdichev once said to God, "Lord of the world, you must forgive Israel their sins. If you do this, good. But if you do not do this, I shall tell all the world that the phylacteries you wear are invalid. For what is the verse enclosed in your phylacteries? It is a verse of David's, of your anointed, who is like thy people Israel, a unique nation on earth. But if you do not forgive Israel their sins, then they are no longer a unique nation on earth. The verse contained in your phylacteries is untrue, and they are become invalid." Another time he said, "Lord of the world, Israel are your head phylacteries. When the phylacteries of a simple Jew fall to the ground, he picks them up carefully, cleans them, and kisses them. Lord, your phylacteries have fallen to the ground." The drayman. Once the rabbi of Berdichev saw a drayman arrayed for the morning service in prayer, shawl, and phylacteries. He was greasing the wheels of his wagon. "Lord of the world," he exclaimed delightedly, "behold this man. Behold the devoutness of your people. Even when they grease the wheels of a wagon, they still are mindful of your name." The woman who cried. The rabbi of Berdichev told the following: "Once, just before New Year's Day, a woman came to me and cried and cried. I asked her, 'Why are you crying? Why are you crying?' She said, 'Why shouldn't I cry? My head hurts.' 'My head hurts,' said I to her. 'Don't cry. If you cry, your head will only hurt more.' She answered, 'Why shouldn't I cry? Why shouldn't I cry? I have an only son, and now this holy and awful day is coming, and I don't know whether my son will pass when God makes judgment.' Said I to her, 'Don't cry, don't cry. He will surely pass when God makes judgment. For look, it is written, Is not Ephraim a precious son unto me? Is he a child of delight? For as often as I speak against him, I do earnestly remember him still. Therefore my heart yearneth for him. I will surely have compassion upon him, saith the Lord. This incident the rabbi of Berdichev used to relate in a curious singing tone, and in the same tone the Hasidim still tell it today. On the ground. A man came to Rabbi Levi Yitzhak and complained, "Rabbi, what shall I do with the lie that keeps sneaking into my heart?" He stopped and then cried aloud, "Oh, and even what I just said was not said truthfully. I shall never find truth." In despair, he threw himself on the ground. "How fervently this man seeks the truth," said the rabbi. With a gentle hand, he raised him from the ground and said, "It is written, the truth will grow out of the ground." The Thick Prayer Book. On one eve of the Day of Atonement, the rabbi of Berdichev waited for a while before going to the pulpit to read the prayers and walked back and forth in the house of prayer. In a corner, he found a man crouched on the floor and weeping. When he questioned him, the man replied, "Up to a short time ago I had all good things, and now I am wretched. Rabbi, I lived in a village, and no hungry man went from my door unfed. My wife used to bring home poor wayfarers she met on the road and see to their needs. And then he comes along. Here the man pointed toward the sky, takes my wife and my house from one day to the next. There I was with 6 small children, without a wife, without a house. And I had a thick prayer book, and all the hymns were in it in just the right order. You didn't have to hunt around. And that burned up along with everything else. Now you tell me, Rabbi, can I forgive him?" The Tzadik had them look for a prayer book like the one the man described. When it was brought, the man began to turn the pages to see if everything was in the correct sequence. And the rabbi of Berdichev waited the while. Finally he asked, "Do you forgive him now?" "Yes," said the man. Then the rabbi went to the pulpit and intoned the prayer, "All vows." The Wisdom of Solomon. They asked Rabbi Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev, with regard to that passage in the scriptures, which states that King Solomon was wiser than all other men. It has been observed, even wiser than fools. What meaning can there be in these apparently meaningless words? The rabbi of Berdichev explained, one characteristic of a fool is that he considers himself wiser than anyone else, and no one can convince him that he is a fool, and that what he does is folly. But Solomon's wisdom was so great that it could assume many different guises, including the guise of the fool. That was why he could hold true converse with fools and impress their hearts until they recognized and professed the sort of people they were. Abraham and Lot. In the course of a journey, the rabbi of Berdichev stopped in Luau and went to the house of a rich and respected man. When he was admitted to the master of the house, he begged for a day's lodging but was silent concerning his name and calling. The rich man answered him gruffly, "I have no use for wayfarers. Why don't you go to an inn?" "I am not a man to stay at an inn," said the rabbi. "Just give me a little space in one of your rooms, and I shall not trouble you for anything else." "Away with you!" cried the other. "If, as you say, you are not a man to stay at an inn, go to the school teacher around the corner. He likes to welcome vagrants like yourself with honor and to give them food and drink." Rabbi Levi Yitzhak went to the school teacher, was received with honor, and given food and drink. But on his way there, someone had recognized him, and soon the whole town buzzed with the news that the holy rabbi of Berdichev was there and had taken lodgings in the house of the school teacher. Hardly had he rested a little when a great throng of people desiring to enter gathered at the door. When it was opened, they flooded in to be blessed by the Tzadik. Among them was the rich man. He fought his way to the rabbi and said, "May the master forgive me and honor my house with his visit. All the Tzadikim who ever came to Luau were my guests." Rabbi Levi Yitzhak turned to those standing around him and said, "Do you know the difference between our father Abraham, peace be with him, and Lot? Why does such a spirit of satisfaction pervade the story of how Abraham set before the angels curd and milk and tender calf? Did not Lot also bake for them and give them to eat? And why is the fact that Abraham received them in his tent regarded as so deserving an action? For Lot also asked them in and gave them shelter. Now this is the truth of the matter. In the case of Lot, it is written that angels came to Sodom. But concerning Abraham, the scriptures say, "And he lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, 3 men stood over against him. Lot saw angelic shapes, Abraham poor, dusty wayfarers, in need of food and rest." Drudgery. Rabbi Levi Yitzhak discovered that the girls who knead the dough for the unleavened bread drudged from early morning until late at night. Then he cried aloud to the congregation gathered in the house of prayer. "Those who hate Israel accuse us of baking the unleavened bread with the blood of Christians. But no, we bake them with the blood of Jews." Charity. When Levi Yitzhak became Rav in Berdichev, he made an agreement with the leaders of the congregation that they were not to ask him to their meetings unless they intended to discuss the introduction of a new usage or a new procedure. One day they asked him to come to a meeting. Immediately after greeting them, he asked, "What is the new procedure you wish to establish?" They answered, "From now on, we do not want the poor to beg at the threshold. We want to put up a box, and all the well-to-do people are to put money into it, each according to his means, and these funds shall be used to provide for the needy." When the rabbi heard this, he said, "My brothers, did I not beg you not to call me away from my studies and summon me to a meeting for the sake of an old usage or an old procedure?" The leaders were astonished and protested, "But Master, the procedure under discussion today is new." "You are mistaken," he cried. "It is age-old. It is an old procedure that dates back to Sodom and Gomorrah. Do you remember what is told about the girl from Sodom who gave a beggar a piece of bread? How they took her and stripped her and smeared her naked body with honey and exposed her for bees to devour because of the great crime she had committed. Who knows? Perhaps they too had a community box into which the well-to-do dropped their alms in order not to be forced to face their poor brothers eye to eye." In a hurry. The rabbi of Berdichev saw a man hurrying along the street, looking neither right nor left. "Why are you rushing so?" he asked him. "I am after my livelihood," the man replied. "And how do you know," continued the rabbi, "that your livelihood is running on before you, so that you have to rush after it? Perhaps it is behind you, and all you need do to encounter it is to stand still, but you are running away from it. What are you doing?" Another time the rabbi of Berdichev saw a man in the marketplace, a man so intent upon his business that he never looked up. He stopped him and asked, "What are you doing?" The man answered hurriedly, "I have no time to talk to you now." But the Tzadik refused to be snubbed. He repeated his question, "What are you doing?" Impatiently the man cried, "Don't delay me. I have to attend to my business." But the rabbi insisted. "All right," he said, "but you, yourself, what are you doing? Everything you are so worried about is in the hands of God, and all that is in yours is to fear God." The man looked up, and for the first time he knew what the fear of God was. The two generals. Rabbi Levi Yitzhak said, "Whether a man really loves God, that can be determined by the love he bears his fellow men. I shall give you a parable. Once upon a time, a country was suffering from the ravages of war. The general who headed the army, which was sent against the foe, was vanquished. The king discharged him and put in his place another man who succeeded in driving out the invader. The first general was suspected of betraying his country. The king wondered whether there was any way to find out whether he really loved or hated him. He realized that there was one unerring sign which would discover the truth to him. If the man, about whom he was in doubt, showed friendship for his rival and expressed unalloyed joy at his success, he might be regarded as trustworthy. But if he plotted against his rival, this would prove his guilt. God created man to strive against the evil in his soul. Now there is many a man who does, indeed, love God, but is defeated in that bitter struggle. He can be recognized by his ability to share wholeheartedly and without reservations in the happiness of his victorious fellow man. Amalek. This is how Rabbi Levi Yitzhak expounded the verse in the scriptures. Remember what Amalek did unto thee. Because you are a man, you first are permitted to remember what the power of evil has done to you. But when you ascend to the rung of the Tzadikim, and your heart has rest from all your enemies round about, then you will blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, and will remember only what the power of evil has done to heaven, how it set up a wall between God and Israel, and drove into exile the divine presence. The greatness of Pharaoh. Rabbi Levi Yitzhak said, I envy Pharaoh. What glorification of the name of God did his stubbornness beget? Chameleons. Rabbi Levi Yitzhak said, It is written, and shall deal corruptly, and make a graven image, even the form of anything. This refers to the chameleons, who when they go among Hasidim, act like Hasidim, and when they are among renegades, adapt themselves to the ways of renegades, and make for themselves the forms of all manner of things. Perhaps a very learned man who had heard of the rabbi of Berdichev, one of those who boasted of being enlightened, looked him up in order to debate with him, as he was in the habit of doing with others, and refuting his old-fashioned proofs for the truth of his faith. When he entered the Tzadik's room, he saw him walking up and down, a book in his hand, immersed in ecstatic thought. The rabbi took no notice of his visitor. After a time, however, he stopped, gave him a brief glance, and said, But perhaps it is true after all. In vain did the learned man try to rally his self-confidence. His knees shook, for the Tzadik was terrible to behold, and his simple words were terrible to hear. But now Rabbi Levi Yitzhak turned to him and calmly addressed him. My son, the great Torah scholars with whom you debated wasted their words on you. When you left them, you only laughed at what they had said. They could not set God and his kingdom on the table before you, and I cannot do this either. But, my son, only think. Perhaps it is true. Perhaps it is true after all. The enlightened man made the utmost effort to reply, but the terrible perhaps beat on his ears again and again and broke down his resistance. The false messiahs. An unbeliever once expounded to the rabbi of Berdichev that even the great old masters had erred gravely, that Rabbi Akiba, for instance, had taken Bar Kokhba, the rebel, for the Messiah, and honored him accordingly. The rabbi of Berdichev replied, There was an emperor whose only son fell ill. One physician advised them to spread an acrid salve on a piece of linen and wrap it around the bare body of the patient. Another contradicted him, saying that the boy was too weak to bear the great pain the salve would cause him. A third prescribed a sleeping potion, but the fourth feared it might prove injurious to the patient's heart. Then the fifth suggested that they give the prince a spoonful whenever he woke up and was in pain. And so it was done. When God saw that the soul of Israel had sickened, he wrapped it in the acrid linen of the exile, and that the soul might bear it, he swathed it in numbing sleep. But lest this destroy it, he wakes it from time to time with the hope in a false Messiah, and then lulls it to rest again until the night is past and the true Messiah appears. And for the sake of this, even the eyes of sages are sometimes blinded. In the marketplace. The rabbi of Berdichev was once in a big marketplace where he saw a welter of men, each possessed with the greed of making profits. He climbed on the roof of a house and called down in a loud voice, You people, you are forgetting to fear God. Once and now. The rabbi of Berdichev said, What I see before me is a topsy-turvy world. Once the whole truth was in the alleys and marketplaces of Israel. There, everyone told the truth, but when they came to the house of prayer, they managed to tell lies. Now it is just the other way round. In the streets and in the squares, they utter falsehoods, but when they enter the house of prayer, they confess the truth. For once it was thus in Israel. Truth and faithfulness were the lamps lighting their steps, and when they went to the marketplace and into the world of trade, with their souls they proved the words, Your yes be true, and your no be true. and all their trading was done in good faith. But when they came to the house of prayer, they beat their breasts and said, "We have trespassed, we have dealt treacherously, we have robbed." And all this was a lie, because they had kept faith before God and man. Today the reverse takes place. In trading they lie and cheat. In their prayer they profess the truth. The Holy of Holies. Rabbi Levi Yitzhak said, "We are forbidden to think evil thoughts, for the mind of man is the Holy of Holies. In it is the ark with the tablets of the law, and if he permits evil thoughts to arise within him, he is setting an idol up in the temple." But when, in the midst of praying, the Tzadik is seized with great fervor, when he kindles with flame and lifts his hands, it is as once, when in the Holy of Holies the cherubim pointed upward their wings. The wicked plot. We must not mortify our flesh. That is what the rabbi of Berdichev used to say. It is nothing but the tempting of the evil urge, which wants to weaken our spirit in order to keep us from serving God rightly. Once 2 strong men were wrestling with each other, and neither could prevail over his opponent. Then one of them had an idea. "I must manage to lessen the power of his mind," he said to himself. "With that, I shall have conquered his body." That is just what the evil urge wants to do when it tempts us to mortify our flesh. True sorrow and true joy. When he was asked which was the right way, that of sorrow or that of joy, the rabbi of Berdichev said, "There are 2 kinds of sorrow and 2 kinds of joy. When a man broods over the misfortunes that have come upon him, when he cowers in a corner and despairs of help, that is a bad kind of sorrow, concerning which it is said, 'The divine presence does not dwell in a place of dejection.' The other kind is the honest grief of a man who knows what he lacks. The same is true of joy. He who is devoid of inner substance and, in the midst of his empty pleasures, does not feel it, nor tries to fill his lack, is a fool. But he who is truly joyful is like a man whose house has burned down, who feels his need deep in his soul and begins to build anew. Over every stone that is laid, his heart rejoices." The dance. When his son had died, Rabbi Levi Yitzhak danced as he followed the bier. Some of his Hasidim could not refrain from expressing their astonishment. "A pure soul," said he, "was given to me. A pure soul I render back." Discipledom. When Rabbi Kalman, the author of the well-known book Light and Sun, was 5 years old, he hid under the prayer shawl of the rabbi of Berdichev, as children like to do, and looked up into his veiled face. Then burning strength entered his heart, suffused it, and took possession of him. After many years, Rabbi Elimelech took some of his noblest disciples to the rabbi of Berdichev. Among them was young Kalman. Rabbi Levi Yitzhak looked at him and recognized him. "That one is mine," he said. Knowing. The rabbi of Berdichev and Aaron, his disciple, were on a journey. They stopped in Lizensk and were the guests of Rabbi Elimelech. When the rabbi of Berdichev left, his disciple remained behind, settled down in the Klaus, the house of study and prayer of Rabbi Elimelech, and began to study there without having told him anything about it. In the evening, the Tzadik went there and noticed him. "Why did you not leave with your rabbi?" he asked. Aaron replied, "I know my rabbi, and I stayed here because I want to learn to know you too." Rabbi Elimelech went close up to him and took him by the coat. "You think you know your rabbi," he exclaimed. "Why, you don't even know his coat." Rabbi Elimelech's answer. During the period when, in many places, the enemies of Hasidic teachings attacked Rabbi Levi Yitzhak because of his manner of conducting the service and did him all possible harm, some understanding people wrote to the great Rabbi Elimelech and asked him how it was that these persons dared to do such things. He answered, "Why does this surprise you? This sort of thing has always gone on in Israel. Alas for our souls! If this were not so, no nation in the whole world could subjugate us." The first page. They asked Rabbi Levi Yitzhak, "Why is the first page number missing in all the tractates of the Babylonian Talmud. Why does each begin with the second? He replied, however much a man may learn, he should always remember that he has not even gotten to the first page. End quote. Hidden teachings. Rabbi Levi Yitzhak said, "It is written in Isaiah, 'For instruction shall go forth from me.' How shall we interpret this? For we believe, with perfect faith, that the Torah, which Moses received on Mount Sinai, cannot be changed, and that none other will be given. It is unalterable, and we are forbidden to question even one of its letters." But, in reality, not only the black letters, but the white gaps in between are symbols of the teaching, only that we are not able to read those gaps. In time to come, God will reveal the white hiddenness of the Torah. The last blowing of the ram's horn. On the last New Year's festival in the life of Rabbi Levi Yitzhak, they tried in vain to blow the ram's horn. No one could wring from it a single note. Finally, the Tzadik himself put it to his lips, but he too did not succeed. It was clear that Satan was involved in this matter. Rabbi Levi Yitzhak put down the horn, laid it aside and cried, "Lord of the world, in your Torah it is written that we Jews are to blow the ram's horn the day on which you created the world. Look down upon us, and you will see that all of us have come with our wives and children to do your command. But if we are denied this, if we are no longer your beloved people, well then let Ivan blow the ram's horn for you." All wept, and in the depths of their hearts they turned to God. After a time the rabbi put the ram's horn to his lips again, and now it emitted a flawlessly pure sound. After the prayer, Rabbi Levi Yitzhak turned to his congregation and said, "I vanquished him, but it will cost me my life. Here I am, a sign offering for Israel." He died a few weeks later. A period extended. At the close of the Day of Atonement, as Rabbi Levi Yitzhak came out of the house of prayer, he said to the people thronging around him, "I tell you that today, the time of my life is up, and I should be leaving the world this very hour. But I was disturbed and troubled that I would not be able to fulfill the two precious commands to dwell in the holiday booth and to say the blessing of the citron that are coming and will be with us in 4 days. And so I prayed that my time might be extended until after the Feast of Tabernacles, and God heard me. And so it was. On the day after the rejoicing in the law, the rabbi of Berditchev fell ill, and on the day after that, he died. The gates of prayer. They tell that the hour Rabbi Levi Yitzhak died, a Tzadik teaching in a distant city suddenly interrupted his discourse, in which he was trying to fuse the power of the doctrine with that of worship, and said to his disciples, "I cannot go on. Everything went dark before my eyes. The gates of prayer are closing. Something must have happened to the great worshiper, to Rabbi Levi Yitzhak." The friend. In Rabbi Levi Yitzhak's time, a holy man lived in the city of Berditchev. They called him the Rabbi of Morchov because he had grown up in Morchov, in the Ukraine. There was friendship between these two, and in their relation to each other, reproof was open and love hidden. When the Tzadik died, the Rabbi of Morchov came to walk behind his bier. When they had carried the body out of the house, he went close up to it, leaned down, and whispered something in the ear of the dead. Only the last words were audible, as it is written, "7 weeks you shall count." When 7 weeks had passed, he himself died. From that time on, Rabbi Levi Yitzhak was dead, and from that time on there was no Rav in Berditchev. The congregation could find no one to fill the place he had left empty. Zusia of Honeypole. The blessings. Rabbi Zusia used to say, "My mother Merle, peace be with her, did not pray from the book because she could not read. All she knew was how to say the blessings. But wherever she said the blessing in the morning, in that place the radiance of the divine presence rested the livelong day." The parable of the woodcutter. In his youth, Zuzia joined the congregation of the great Maggid, Rabbi Baal of Mezritch, but he did not stay with the other disciples. He roamed through the woods, lay down in hidden places, and sang his praises to God, until the people quoted Solomon's words when they spoke of him. With her love, be thou ravished always. His younger brother, Elimelech, who was still a boy and did not as yet belong to the congregation, sat over his books. He wondered at Zuzia and once asked him, "Brother, why do you act so, that everyone in the house of study says it is strange?" Zuzia answered him with a smile, "My brother, I shall tell you a story, and this is the story." A poor woodcutter had a great longing to see the king face to face. So he left his village and walked for many days until he came to the city where the king lived. After trying for a long time, he succeeded in getting employment in the king's palace. He was to tend the stoves, and now he put all the zeal and good sense he was capable of into his work. He went to the forest himself, fetched the best wood, fragrant with resin, split it into even logs, and at just the right hour, stacked these deftly in the various fireplaces. The king enjoyed the good, living warmth. It was better than what he had had, and he asked how this came about. When they told him about the woodcutter and his work, he sent him a message that he could nave a wish. The poor man begged that he might be allowed to see the king every once in a while. His wish was granted. They made a window in a narrow passage which led to the woodshed, and this window faced the king's living room, so the woodcutter could look through and satisfy his longing. Now once, when the prince was seated at his father's board, he said something which displeased him and was punished by a year's banishment from the king's apartments. For a time, he lived in bitter loneliness. Then he began to wander mournfully through the corridors of the palace. When he came to the little window they had made for the woodcutter, he was seized with still greater longing to see his father again and begged the man to let him look through. They got to talking together. "My brother," said Zuzia to Elimelech, when he had reached this point in his story, "this is what the woodcutter told the prince when they were talking to each other. You are at home in the rooms of the Lord and eat at his table. All you need do is to govern your speech wisely. But I have neither wisdom nor learning, and so I must perform my lowly service that I may sometimes see the Lord's face." End quote. The Word. This was told by Rabbi Israel of Rizhin. All the pupils of my ancestors, the great Maggid, transmitted the teachings in his name, all except Rabbi Zuzia. And the reason for this was that Rabbi Zuzia hardly ever heard his teacher's sermon out to the end. For at the very start, when the Maggid recited the verse from the scriptures which he was going to expound, and began with the words of the scriptures, "And God said," or "And God spoke," Rabbi Zuzia was overcome with ecstasy, and screamed and gesticulated so wildly that he disturbed the peace of the round table and had to be taken out. And then he stood in the hall, or in the woodshed, beat his hands against the walls, and cried aloud, "And God said." He did not quiet down until my ancestor had finished expounding the scriptures. That is why he was not familiar with the sermons of the Maggid. But the truth, I tell you, the truth is this: if a man speaks in the spirit of truth and listens in the spirit of truth, one word is enough. For with one word can the world be uplifted, and with one word can the world be redeemed. Only the good. Once when young Zuzia was in the house of his teacher, Rabbi Baal, a man came before the great Maggid and begged him to advise and assist him in an enterprise. Zuzia saw that this man was full of sin and untouched by any breath of repentance. He grew angry and spoke to him harshly, saying, "How can a man like yourself, a man who has committed this crime and that, have the boldness to stand before a holy countenance without shame and without the longing to atone?" The man left in silence, but Zuzia regretted what he had said and did not know what to do. Then his teacher pronounced a blessing over him, that from this moment on, he might see only the good in people, even if a person sinned before his very eyes. But because Zuzia's gift of vision could not be taken from him through words spoken by man, it came to pass that from this time on he felt the sins of the people he met as his own, and blamed himself for them. Whenever the rabbi of Regine told this about Rabbi Zusha, he was likely to add, "And if all of us were like him, evil would long since have been destroyed, and death overcome, and perfection achieved." Suffering. When Rabbi Shmelke and his brother visited the Maggid of Mezritch, they asked him about the following. "Our sages said certain words which leave us no peace because we do not understand them. They are that men should praise and thank God for suffering just as much as for well-being, and receive it with the same joy. Will you tell us how we are to understand this, Rabbi?" The Maggid replied, "Go to the house of study. There you will find Zusha smoking his pipe. He will give you the explanation." They went to the house of study and put their question to Rabbi Zusha. He laughed. "You certainly have come to the right man. Better go to someone else rather than to me, for I have never experienced suffering." But the two knew that, from the day he was born to this day, Rabbi Zusha's life had been a web of need and anguish. Then they knew what it was, to accept suffering with love. The garments of mercy. They asked Rabbi Zusha, "We pray, and bestow good mercy upon us. And who bestowest good mercy? Is not every mercy good?" He explained, "Of course every mercy is good. But the truth of the matter is that all God does is mercy, only that the world cannot bear the naked fill of his mercy, and so he has sheathed it in garments. That is why we beg him, that the garment too may be good." The recipient. A man who lived in the same town as Rabbi Zusha saw that he was very poor. So each day he put 20 pennies into the little bag in which Zusha kept his phylacteries, so that he and his family might buy the necessaries of life. From that time on, the man grew richer and richer. The more he had, the more he gave Zusha, and the more he gave Zusha, the more he had. But once he recalled that Zusha was the disciple of a great Maggid, and it occurred to him that if what he gave the disciple was so lavishly rewarded, he might become even more prosperous if he made presents to the master himself. So he traveled to Mezritch and induced Rabbi Ber to accept a substantial gift from him. From this time on, his means shrank until he had lost all the profits he had made during the more fortunate period. He took his trouble to Rabbi Zusha, told him the whole story, and asked him what his present predicament was due to, for had not the rabbi himself told him that his master was immeasurably greater than he? Zusha replied, "Look, as long as you gave, and did not bother to whom, whether to Zusha or another, God gave to you, and did not bother to whom. But when you began to seek out especially noble and distinguished recipients, God did exactly the same." The offering. They said to Rabbi Zusha, "It is written, 'Speak unto the children of Israel, that they take for me an offering.' Should it not rather be that they make for me an offering?" Rabbi Zusha replied, "It is not enough for him who gives to the needy to do this in the spirit of holiness. The needy must also take in the spirit of holiness. It is not enough to give in the name of God. What is given must also be taken in the name of God. That is why it is written, that they take for me an offering." On the road. For 3 years, Zusha and Elimelech journeyed through the land, for they wanted to share the lot of the divine presence in exile and convert to it erring mankind. Once they spent the night at an inn where a wedding was being celebrated. The guests were rough and tough fellows to begin with, and had drunk far more than was good for them. They were just trying to think up some new fun for themselves when the poor travelers arrived in the nick of time for their purpose. They had hardly lain down in a corner, Rabbi Elimelech against the wall, and Rabbi Zusha beside him, when those fellows came, grabbed Zusha, who was closest to hand, beat him, and tormented him. After a time, they let him slide to the floor and began to dance. Elimelech was annoyed that they had let him lie on his sack undisturbed. He envied his brother the blows he had received. So he said, "Dear brother, now let me lie in your place, and you sleep in my corner." And they changed places. When the fellows had finished dancing, they wanted to go on with the fun they had had, and laid hands on Rabbi Elimelech. But one of them cried, "This isn't according to law and order. Let the other one have his share of our gifts of honor." With that, they dragged Zusia out of his corner, gave him a second drubbing, and shouted, "You too shall carry away a souvenir of the wedding." Then Zusia laughed and said to Elimelech, "You see, dear brother, if blows are appointed to a man, they will always find him out, no matter where he puts himself." The horses. In the course of their long wanderings, the two brothers, Rabbi Zusia and Rabbi Elimelech, often came to the city of Ludmir. There they always slept in the house of a poor, devout man. Years later, when their reputation had spread all over the country, they came to Ludmir again, not on foot as before, but in a carriage. The wealthiest man in that little town, who had never wanted to have anything to do with them, came to meet them the moment he heard they had arrived, and begged them to lodge in his house. But they said, "Nothing has changed in us to make you respect us more than before. What is new is just the horses and the carriage. Take them for your guests, but let us stop with our old host, as usual." The fruits of wandering. When Rabbi Noah of Kobrin, the grandson of Rabbi Moshe of Kobrin, was in Sadagora, he heard someone say, "You will find Hasidim," up to the point the brothers Rabbi Zusia and Rabbi Elimelech reached in their long wanderings. Beyond that, you will not find Hasidim. The Sabbath feeling. Week after week, from the coming of the Sabbath to the going, and especially when they ate the Sabbath meal among the Hasidim and spoke words of teaching, Rabbi Elimelech and Rabbi Zusia were overcome by a feeling of holiness. Once, when they were together, Rabbi Elimelech said to Rabbi Zusia, "Brother, I am sometimes afraid that my feeling of holiness on the Sabbath may not be a true feeling, and that in that case my service may not be the right service." Ivrit 10. "Brother," said Zusia, "I too am sometimes afraid of that very thing." "What shall we do about it?" asked Elimelech. Zusia replied, "Let each of us, on a weekday, prepare a meal which is exactly like the Sabbath meal, and let us sit with the Hasidim and say words of teaching. Then, if we have that feeling of holiness, we shall know that our way is not the true way. But if we do not have it, this will prove that our way is right." And they did accordingly. They prepared a Sabbath meal on a weekday, put on Sabbath clothes and the fur caps they wore on the Sabbath, ate with the Hasidim, and spoke words of teaching. And the feeling of holiness overcame them just as on the Sabbath. When they were alone together, Rabbi Elimelech asked, "Brother, what shall we do?" "Let us go to the Rabbi of Mezritch," said Rabbi Zusia. They went to Mezritch and told their teacher what was weighing upon them. The Maggid said, "If you put on Sabbath clothes and Sabbath caps, it is quite right that you had a feeling of Sabbath holiness. Because Sabbath clothes and Sabbath caps have the power of drawing the light of Sabbath holiness down to earth. So you need have no fears." Zusia and the sinner. Once Rabbi Zusia came to an inn, and on the forehead of the innkeeper he saw long years of sin. For a while he neither spoke nor moved. But when he was alone in the room which had been assigned to him, the shudder of vicarious experience overcame him in the midst of singing psalms, and he cried aloud, "Zusia, Zusia, you wicked man, what have you done? There is no lie that failed to tempt you, and no crime you have not committed. Zusia, foolish, erring man, what will be the end of this?" Then he enumerated the sins of the innkeeper, giving the time and place of each as his own, and sobbed. The innkeeper had quietly followed this strange man. He stood at the door and heard him. First he was seized with dull dismay, but then penitence and grace were lit within him, and he woke to God. Joint penance. This was told by a reader in the house of prayer. When I heard that Rabbi Zusia helped people to turn to God, I decided to go to him. When I arrived in Hanipol, I immediately went to his house, put down my sticks and knapsack, and asked for him. The rabbi's wife told me to go to the house of study. I could see the rabbi from the threshold. He was wearing his prayer shawl, had just taken off his phylacteries, and was reciting the psalm, "Answer me when I call." While he said these words, he wept more bitterly than I had ever heard or seen anyone weep. And then, on the floor, I saw a man who was moaning quietly to himself. Suddenly, he screamed, "I am a great sinner!" It took me quite a while to understand what was going on, and later I learned the whole story. The man was an assistant in the house of study of the town he lived in. He had been urged to go to Rabbi Zusia to be told what to do as a penance. But when he stood in front of the rabbi, he refused to do penance. But the rabbi himself told me what happened then. It was when I discussed my own affairs with him and mentioned what I had seen. "What did Zusia do then?" he said to me. "I climbed down all the rungs until I was with him and bound the root of my soul to the root of his. Then he had no choice but to do penance along with me, and it was a very great and very terrible penance. But when the man stopped screaming and moaning, I saw the rabbi go up to him. He bent down, took him by the curls at his temples, and gently turned his head around. Finally he lifted him with both hands and set him on his feet. 'Thine iniquity is taken away,' he said, 'and thy sin expiated.' But I myself," so the man who told me the story added, "later became the reader in Rabbi Zusia's house of prayer." The bold-faced and the shame-faced. Our sages say, "The bold-faced go to hell, the shame-faced to paradise." Rabbi Zusia, God's fool, expounded these words as follows: "Whoever is bold in his holiness may descend to hell in order to raise what is base. He may roam about in alleys and marketplaces and need not fear evil. But he who is shame-faced, who lacks boldness, must keep to the heights of paradise, to studying and praying. He must beware of coming in contact with evil." Tzadik and Hasidim. On one of the days of heart-searching, the days between New Year and the Day of Atonement, Rabbi Zusia sat in his chair, and his Hasidim stood around him from morning until evening. He had lifted his eyes and his heart to heaven and loosed himself from all bodily bonds. While looking at him, one of his Hasidim was overcome with the desire to turn to God, and the tears streamed over his face. And just as a burning coal kindles those beside it, so man by man was lit with the flame of turning. Then the Tzadik looked around and fixed them with his gaze. Again he lifted his eyes and said to God, "Lord of the world, this is indeed the right time for the turning. But you know that I have not the strength to do penance, so accept as penance my love and my shame." Humility. Rabbi Zusia and his brother Rabbi Elimelech were once discussing the subject of humility. Elimelech said, "If a man contemplates the greatness of the Creator, he will arrive at true humility." But Zusia said, "No, a man must begin by being truly humble. Only then will he recognize the greatness of his Creator." They asked their teacher, the Maggid, who was right. He decided it in this way: "These and those are the words of the living God, but the inner grace is his who begins with himself and not with the Creator." Of Adam. Zusia once asked his brother, wise Rabbi Elimelech, "Dear brother, in the scriptures, we read that the souls of all men were comprised in Adam, so we too must have been present when he ate the apple. I do not understand how I could have let him eat it, and how could you have let him eat it?" Elimelech replied, "We had to, just as all had to, for had he not eaten, the poison of the snake would have remained within him in all eternity. He would always have thought, 'All I need do is eat of this tree, and I shall be as God. All I need do is eat of this tree, and I shall be as God.'" Get thee out of thy country. Rabbi Zusia taught, God said to Abraham, "Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto the land that I will show thee." God says to man, first, get you out of your country. That means the dimness you have inflicted on yourself. Then out of your birthplace. That means out of the dimness your mother inflicted on you. After that, out of the house of your father. That means out of the dimness your father inflicted on you. Only then will you be able to go to the land that I will show you. And Israel saw. They asked Rabbi Zusia, "It is written, and Israel saw Egypt dead upon the seashore. Why are the Egyptians referred to in the singular and not in the plural?" And further on it is written, "And Israel saw the great hand. Had they not seen it up to then?" He expounded, "As long as the prince demon of Egypt was alive and ruled, he saw to it that a curtain separated Israel from their Father in heaven, so that they could not see his splendor. But when the prince demon of Egypt, and this is the reason for the singular, lay dead on the seashore, the curtain tore asunder, and with their open eyes they saw his great hand." Zusia and his wife. Zusha's wife was a shrew. She kept nagging him to give her a divorce, and his heart was weighed down by her words. One night he called her name and said to her, "Look," and he showed her that his pillow was wet with tears. Then he went on, "In the Gemara it is written that if a man puts his first wife away, the altar itself will shed tears for him. My pillow is wet with these tears. And now what do you want? Do you still want a letter of divorce?" From this moment on, she grew quiet. And when she was really quiet, she grew happy. And when she was happy, she grew good. Zusha and the birds. Once Rabbi Zusia traveled cross-country collecting money to ransom prisoners. He came to an inn at a time when the innkeeper was not at home. He went through the rooms, according to custom, and in one saw a large cage with all kinds of birds. And Zusia saw that the caged creatures wanted to fly through the spaces of the world and be free birds again. He burned with pity for them and said to himself, "Here you are, Zusha, walking your feet off to ransom prisoners. But what greater ransoming of prisoners can there be than to free these birds from their prison?" Then he opened the cage, and the birds flew out into freedom. When the innkeeper returned and saw the empty cage, he was very angry and asked the people in the house who had done this to him. They answered, "A man is loitering about here and he looks like a fool. No one but he can have done this thing." The innkeeper shouted at Zusia, "You fool! How could you have the impudence to rob me of my birds and make worthless the good money I paid for them?" Zusia replied, "You have often read and repeated these words in the Psalms. His tender mercies are over all his works." Then the innkeeper beat him until his hand grew tired, and finally threw him out of the house. And Zusia went his way serenely. His days. Every morning at rising, before he spoke a word to God or to men, it was Rabbi Zusia's custom to call out, "Good morning," to all of Israel. During the day, he wrote everything he did down on a slip of paper. Before going to bed at night, he fetched it, read it, and wept until the writing was blurred with his tears. The blessing. Whenever Zusia met a Jewish boy, he blessed him with the words, "Be healthy and strong as a goy." The song. Once, on the eve of the Day of Atonement, Rabbi Zusia heard a cantor in the house of prayer chanting the words, "And it is forgiven," in strange and beautiful tones. Then he called to God, "Lord of the world, had Israel not sinned, how could such a song have been intoned before you?" He who answers Amen. Concerning the words of our sages, he who answers Amen shall not raise his voice above his who says the blessing. Rabbi Zusia said, "The soul says the blessing. The body answers Amen. The body shall not dare to speak more fervently than the soul has spoken." Zusia's devotions. Zusia was once a guest in the house of the Rabbi of Mezritch. Shortly after midnight, the host heard sounds coming from his guest's room, so he went to the door and listened. Zusia was running back and forth in the room saying, "Lord of the world, I love you, but what is there for me to do? I can't do anything." And then he started running back and forth again, repeating the same thing, until suddenly he bethought himself and cried, "Why, I know how to whistle, so I shall whistle something for you." But when he began to whistle, the Rabbi of Mezritch grew frightened. The fear of God. Once Zuzia prayed to God, "Lord, I love you so much, but I do not fear you enough. Lord, I love you so much, but I do not fear you enough. Let me stand in awe of you like your angels, who are penetrated by your awe-inspiring name." And God heard his prayer, and his name penetrated the hidden heart of Zuzia as it does those of the angels. But Zuzia crawled under the bed like a little dog, and animal fear shook him until he howled, "Lord, let me love you like Zuzia again." And God heard him this time also. The creation of angels. Once Rabbi Zuzia was pondering over that passage in the Talmud, which deals with hospitality. There it is written, "Those of Israel, holy are they. Many a one wants to, and has not. Many a one has, and does not want to." He could not understand why both, the hospitable man who has not, and the miser, should be called holy. And because he could not understand, he wept. Then the meaning was revealed to him. Everybody knows that an angel springs from each good deed, but angels have a soul and a body, just as we do, only that their body consists of fire and wind. Now, who wants to and has not can create only the soul of the angel. Who has and does not want to, and invites a guest only because he is ashamed not to, can create only the body of the angel. But we know that in Israel everyone vouches for everyone else, and so their works fuse as though they were those of a single being. In the same way, the soul and the body of the angel which has been created are fused together. The miser, to be sure, remains just as unholy as he was. But if the created soul finds a body with which it can clothe itself, the fusion of the two creations manifests the holiness of Israel. The accuser. This is Rabbi Zuzia's comment on the passage in the sayings of the fathers. He who commits one transgression has gotten himself one accuser. Every sin begets an accusing angel. But I have never seen a complete angel spring from the sin of a devout man of Israel. Sometimes he lacks a head, sometimes his body is crippled. For when a man of Israel believes in God, believes in him even while he is sinning, his heart aches, and what he does not do with all his will. And so the angel never emerges complete. Infract. Above them. A Hasid asked Rabbi Zuzia concerning Abraham receiving the three angels. It is written, "And he took curd and milk and the calf which he had dressed, and set it before them. And he stood above them under the tree, and they did eat." It is not strange that here the man stood above the angels. Rabbi Zuzia expounded, "When a man eats in a state of consecration, he redeems the holy sparks which are imprisoned in food. But the angels are not aware of this service unless the man has told them of it. That is why it is written of Abraham that he stood above them. He let the consecration of the meal descend on them." The wheel. Rabbi Israel of Rizhin had been falsely accused and put in prison. There he said, "Heaven once revealed to Rabbi Zuzia that he was to go to a village not far from Hanapol and guide a tax collector on the true way. He went there immediately and found the man selling vodka to the peasants. He tried to make him stop and say a prayer, but the collector became more and more impatient. When Rabbi Zuzia continued to exhort him in spite of his rejection, and even laid an urgent hand on his arm, he took hold of the intruder, shoved him out into the court, and shut the door on him. It was very cold, and the rabbi shivered all over. Then he caught sight of an old wagon wheel lying on the ground and put it against his body. And instantly it became a wheel of the chariot of heaven and gave out delicious warmth. That was how the tax collector found him. When he saw the blissful smile on Rabbi Zuzia's lips, he experienced the truth about life in one small second, and already, with faltering feet and full of amazement at himself, he stood on the true way. He's a best of the friends. At the crossroads. On one of his wanderings, Rabbi Zuzia came to a crossroads and did not know which of the two roads to take. Then he lifted his eyes and saw the divine presence leading the way. The Poles have no savoir-vivre. Rabbi Nathan Adler of Frankfurt related, "It is not for nothing that they say the Poles have no savoir-vivre. No matter when I lift my soul to heaven, Rabbi Zusha is always there ahead of me. Once I fasted for a long time, in order to reach the gates of heaven while they are still closed. I stood before the gates, and when they were opened, I was the very first to enter. And whom do you suppose I saw inside? Rabbi Zusha. How he got in, I don't know, but he was certainly there. He had not had the grace to wait until he was admitted. It is not for nothing that they say the Poles have no savoir-vivre." Zusha, and fire and earth. Zusha once put his hand into the fire. When the flames scorched him, and he drew it back, he was surprised and said, "Dear me, how crude is Zusha's body, that it fears fire." Another time he said to the earth, "Earth, earth, you are better than I, and yet I trample on you with my feet, but soon I shall lie under you and be subject to you." Fire and cloud. It is told, on a certain Feast of Tabernacles, before the world had become aware of Zusha, he lived in the booth of the Rav of Ostrog. When evening came, the Rav lay down on his soft couch heaped high with pillows and blankets, while Zusha slept on the ground in the manner of poor Sabbath guests. In the course of the night he said to himself, "Ah, Zusha feels cold. He cannot sleep in the booth." That very instant, a fire descended from heaven and warmed the booth so well that the Rav of Ostrog had to throw off feather beds and blankets. "Now it is warm enough," said Zusha. Immediately the Prince of Fire departed, and the Rav of Ostrog had to pull up one cover after another. This recurred a number of times. Heat alternated with cold, and when morning came, the Rav of Ostrog no longer addressed his guest as Zusha, but Reb Zusha. When the Feast of Tabernacles was over, Zusha wanted to continue his journey, but his sore feet would not carry him, and he sighed, "O Lord of the world, Zusha cannot walk." Then a cloud floated down and said, "Get in." "Rabbi," shouted the Rav of Ostrog, "I'll rent a carriage for you, but send that cloud away." From that time on, he no longer called him Reb Zusha, but Rebbe Reb Zusha, and ever since then, that was the name he went by in the entire country. Terror. It is told, it was after maneuvers, and the victorious army returned via Hanipol. There they made themselves at home in the inn, drank everything in sight, and did not pay a red penny. They wanted to go on drinking, but since there was nothing left, they smashed all the glasses and utensils. Then they demanded more liquor, and because there was none, they beat up the innkeeper and his helpers. The terrified man finally got a message through to Rabbi Zusha. Zusha came at once, stopped outside the window, looked in at the soldiers, and 3 times in succession said the words of the prayer, "Yuveken ten padeka, Lord, our God, lay your terror on all of your creatures." At that, all the soldiers rushed out of the door, and the windows in mad haste left their guns and knapsacks behind, and ran down the street without paying any attention to their commanding officer, who came toward them at the outskirts of the town. Not until he called to them in an angry voice did they stop. They told him. An old Jew came and yelled, "Padak!" Then we were scared to death. We don't know how or why, and even now we are still afraid. The commander led them back to the inn, where they had to pay for the damage they had done and give compensation for the beatings before he let them march on. The Shepherd's Song. Rabbi Zusha once passed a meadow where a swineherd in the midst of his flock was playing a song on a willow flute. He came close and listened until he had learned it and could take it away with him. In this way, the Song of David, the shepherd boy, was freed from its long captivity. Sickness. Rabbi Zusha grew to be very old. He spent the last 7 years of his life on a sickbed, for so it is written of him, he had taken suffering upon himself in order to shrive Israel. One day, he received as visitors the seer of Lublin and Rabbi Hirsch Leibovolik. The latter said to the seer, "Why can you not do what Rabbi Yohanan did for his sick friends? Give him your hand so that he may rise." The rabbi of Lublin burst into tears. Then the rabbi of Olich asked him, "Why do you weep? Do you think he is sick because such is his destiny? He has taken suffering upon himself of his own free will, and is taking it, and if he wanted to rise, he would not need the hand of a stranger to do so." End quote. The query of queries. Before his death, Rabbi Zusha said, "In the coming world, they will not ask me, 'Why were you not Moses?' They will ask me, 'Why were you not Zusha?'" The tombstone. On Rabbi Zusha's tombstone are the words, "One who served God with love, who rejoiced in suffering, who rested many from their sins." The fire. A certain Rav in Hanapol, one of our own day, wrote down the following. At night, when not a soul was in the graveyard, the lantern above Rabbi Zusia's grave fell to the ground. Rabbi Zusia's tent lies between that of the great Maggid and another Tzadik. It was a very old rule that no one should visit these graves without having been in the bath of purification and without taking off his shoes. Only one watchman was allowed to go there without observing these rules, to tend the everlasting light 3 times a day. The everlasting light burned in 3 lamps set into 1 lantern. It burned over a wooden shrine erected above the graves. The shrine was covered with boards, and in it were hundreds of pleas on slips of paper, each brought by another visitor. On the earth lay twigs, and these too had been laid down on the graves by visitors, for such was the custom. Now, when the lantern fell and fire broke out, all the papers in the shrine were burned, and all the withered sprays on the ground, but the flames did not harm the wood of the shrine itself, though it was very dry. The secret of sleep. Rabbi Zusia's younger son said, "The Tzadikim who, in order to serve, keep going from sanctuary to sanctuary, and from world to world, must cast their life from them, time and again, so that they may receive a new spirit, that over and over, a new revelation may float above them. This is the secret of sleep."